We are going to start, once again, the preaching about the third Elijah. You can see that it has given many parts of itself, and it will probably give a few more. This very afternoon, we are going to continue with this topic. And as usual, before starting, I would like to say a prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, we want to ask for your guidance over us. We want to ask that your Holy Spirit may also rest upon us, so that we may deepen our knowledge of your word, and that you help us understand many more things that we are now seeing are necessary and essential, not only for us, but also to be able to share the gospel with many more whom it was difficult to reach. And I am thinking especially of the Jewish people who are around this world. Help us close this circle to also give them the message so that they can make their decision for you. And many of them may be added to the definitive people, to the spiritual Israel that we can all be. Bless us and forgive us our sins. We ask all of this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Well, we have been talking about chapter 17, about chapter 18 of 1 Kings, and today we will not move forward. We are not going to move on to chapter 19 because we still had something left over from chapter 18. What's more, today we are going to look at some words that we still had left to examine. And we are not only going to look at those words, but afterwards we will even see a video of a certain place. And that place is Mount Carmel. This afternoon, we are going to continue, God willing, and we will do something that I think will surprise you as much as it surprised me, because I really was unaware of what happened there. And it happened. And we will do some history, and we are going to show things that many people, generally speaking, are unaware of, and that will have fundamental importance for understanding many things that, of course, will leave us perplexed. But today, I'm telling you, I'm not going to start with chapter 19. God willing, if we finish the topic today, that is the next thing we will do. And without further ado, I would like to move on to where we left off. I am not going to show you the text precisely from the book of 1 Kings 18, because we have already read it, and surely as we go along showing the words that we had left to determine, you'll remember more or less where they were located. If you like, you can always keep your Bible open with you to chapters 17 and 18 of 1 Kings, because if there is any word among those we are going to analyze that you don't remember where it was located, you'll be able to see it in the text. Keep in mind that we are putting them in correlative order. From chapter 17, we are progressing word by word through the specific names we find. And well, now we are going to continue with this. I'm just going to make a quick change to the image. I've moved to another spot. Now you'll be able to see everything much better. You can all see it well, right? Look at the presentation image for today's topic, the third Elijah, part 4. What you see here is Mount Carmel, but I didn't choose this photo at random. You know, sometimes we talk a lot about how Elijah is in that place and prays one prayer after another. How many times? 7. For his servant to go and return to him and scan the horizon until he sees the sign of the cloud, like a man's hand that was approaching. And we have seen everything that represents, and surely much more. But sometimes we don't really place where this happened. Sometimes we can imagine a few things, right? But this is the place for Mount Carmel, where, in some specific spot around here, Elijah told his servant while he was praying, "Go and look." Well, this is what the servant saw when he went to look at the horizon. We don't know if it's from where the photograph is taken, or it could also be from another place, or perhaps where that building you see right at the end of this mountain is, at the summit. This afternoon, we are going to talk about what is there. And not just there, but also below this mountain. Very close to this mountain, there is a city called Haifa, which you will surely know in the Bible as Joppa. Well then, today we're going to see what's in that city so close to Mount Carmel, which I think won't leave us indifferent at all. But once again, I want to refer you to this snapshot so you can see that this mountain practically ends right at the beach, very close to it, and everything else we see is sea and horizon. Well, this was the Mount Carmel area, and it still is, where all the episodes we've seen so far took place. And we are going to continue where we left off with the word Kishon. You already know that Kishon, what was it? Was Kishon a piece of land? River. It was a river. Let's zoom in a bit so we can see what area we're talking about. Right away, what stands out on this map, if we look at some letters in bolder print, is Haifa. You can see it, right? Right on this horn. Curious. On this horn of land. Haifa is where Mount Carmel is located. Everything you see in that area, practically from Haifa, is Mount Carmel. Today we're going to look at the length of Mount Carmel, its shape, and a few other things. Once we're situated in this land of Israel, right in this area, we're going to zoom in a bit more and see where the Kishon River was as well. Or the Kishon River, depending on the term. And here you have precisely where this stream, not really a stream, the Kishon River, passed, and which also had a key point in connection with it. And that is what you see on this map of the Valley of Megiddo. This sounds familiar, right? We were talking about Armageddon. Well, the Valley of Megiddo is, as you can see, on the path of the Kishon River. That's the river today, huh? Yes, certainly. Look now, when we go to look for the meaning of the word in the Strong's Concordance, we see that Kishon, of course, was a Levitical city in Issachar, also known as Kadesh, but it was also the stream in northern Palestine. Precisely, in this sense, is where we find the case of Elijah, who was at the brook of Kishon. And we go to a reference, 728, and everything else referred to precisely with Kishon. The meaning of Kishon is hard soil. But we are seeing the meanings where it is leading us. Kishi also means obstinacy, hardness. What obstinacy was there, or what hardness was there precisely in that place? Was it not the hardness of King Ahab, also with Jezebel, of course, but of the majority of the people who were following the prophets of Baal and Asherah? The people were obstinate. And what was Elijah called to do? To turn their hearts back to God. Then we also see that it refers us to kasha, which is the primitive root, which tells us to be dense, hard, or severe. Hard or severe. What did Elijah do? Was he not hard or severe? Yes. Did he not literally execute 450 satanic prophets? It tells us to aggravate a difficult thing, hard, to harden, to labor in childbirth, heavy, violent. Look at the meanings that denote to us that, in reality, that situation was very hard for everyone who was there. Do you realize how the things that are located in these places happen exactly where, by name, they were supposed to happen? This doesn't happen just anywhere. It happens precisely there. And their meanings are vital to give us even more understanding of what was happening there. Kishon, what does it mean? Undulating. Once again, we see something. What is an undulation? It's something that is down, goes up a little, goes back down, and so on, like a speed bump, right? Continuous. It's also another way of, what? Snaking, but placed vertically. Well, look also at where this word takes us in kosh, primitive root, to bend, to prepare a trap, to set a snare. What does that bring into mind for you? What did we say about Orion? Who was the hunter? Isn't it God? Well, look at how all these connotations also lead us once again to who it is that prepares the traps. The hunter, the one who sets the snare. That's how they used to hunt before, and they still hunt like that in certain places, right? Everything was already referencing the connection between what was happening in that place, on earth, with the reference to what is in the sky. Look at how it is a continuum. We have seen it in all the topics about dimensional portals, but we just don't stop continuously finding more of the same. And all of this has great importance, which we will continue to see even more of. Look at how it also keeps referring us to other words. Yakosh, which means to entrap. Hunter, to bind, to entangle, snare, to set a snare, to stumble. What happened on that mountain? Wasn't it setting a snare, setting a trap? What did Elijah do? Look, he set a trap for him. I mean, when he was supposed to be the one trapped in principle, it was he who, thanks to divine inspiration, told them, come on, gather yourselves all together, make this altar and your sacrifices, do your here, until something happens. And it was the trap he was preparing for them, because in the end, they fell for it completely. The words that are being given don't just happen for no reason. You see, every place was precise. He slaughtered them there. Right there, at the Kishon Torah. Slaughtering them at the Kishon Torah was not the same as if he had done it in any other place. Do we realize why everything was chosen exactly in the place where it had to be? It is making continuous references to us. Heaven, earth, heaven, earth. And Eridanus, let's see. Yeah, of course. Eridanus was the river of fire, the one that, what was it going to do, or what will it do at the end of times? Well, simply put, execute divine judgment, right? Everything will be destroyed by fire. And it was a river. There it executed judgment. Of course, it executes a judgment, not in those cases with fire, but right in the river, which is the same thing. Eridanus would be, so to speak. Once we've seen this, we move on to another word that appeared there, which was Jezreel. And as you can see, it's a town in Judah. And we are going to look for precisely the definition 3157, which tells us that in Hebrew it is Yisrael, and it has, let's see, the analysis of the words and their derivations or their roots as well. It means God will sow. God will sow. What did God sow there? What did he sow? God went, come on, I'm going to sow here. What was it that he was sowing? The Word. Yes, he was sowing the Word again and then reaping the fruits of it. But to reap fruits, what does the farmer do first? He sows. Let's also see, now that it leads us to Zara, which is the primal root, it tells us to sow, disseminate, plant, fructify, bear fruit, conceive, scatter, plant, sow, that not even a memory remains, that one must sow, that the one who sows be fruitful. Look at how it even says that not even a memory should remain. What was it that was not supposed to remain in memory there? Well, what was not supposed to remain in memory was precisely that people should continue to follow the Baals and that other female divinity about whom we will be forced to keep talking. But you see, above all, to plant, to fructify, everything always with that language which deep down is giving the word so that it may finally bear fruit. It also leads us to the ending, which is the short form. It tells us strength, as an adjective, powerful, especially who? The Almighty, but it is also used with any deity. Let's keep this in mind, but it is referring to God. Strong, strength, greatness, idol, power, powerful, potentate. And so all the names that end in L. We are going to realize whenever we look at the Bible how basically all of God's titles, there is someone who is also claiming them for themselves and has been doing so for many years, Satan. But there are also others on earth who are doing the same thing, taking on the usurping role of God. And you already know who I'm referring to, right? And why am I telling you this now? What does the papacy, for example, have to do with it? That the Pope plays the role of high priest, usurping the place of Christ, right? Why do I mention the Pope now, for example, here? Or any of the popes who have passed through history? Well, it's very simple. There, right in that place, we are going to find that there's a great weight of the Catholic Church right in the area we are dealing with. And we are going to see what happened there many years ago, linked to them, and what is still happening now. But we can already see that, above all, it is referring to God, who is the one acting in the background in those biblical episodes. It also refers us to Isle, which means strength, hence anything strong, especially a leader, politically. Also a ram, because of its strength. Do you remember any constellation that has to do with a ram? With a ram. Capricorn's a goat. Aries, perhaps? Well, then we will also deal with that in dimensional gates, because we will see that these names that are appearing here once again make us the reference to what is up there in the sky. I'm not talking about zodiacs, astrology, and let's see what happens to us in the future thanks to the stars, huh? That's a different story. That is the satanic side. Nothing to do with the divine. But let's look at how, once again, it refers us to something that Angel is going to like a lot. After ram, it tells us pilaster is a strong support, therefore that it is a column, huh? Oak or another strong tree. I don't know. Angel must be loving this. It tells us tree, holm oak, ram, powerful, post, threshold, brave. Who is brave? Orion, right? Ahata is the brave one. Well then, everything is referring us to this chief, who ultimately is God. I'm not going to say anything else about the tree because Angel has already talked to us a lot about the tree, and maybe he'll even say something more. And look, also, ul, from a root that isn't used, which means to twist, to be strong. The body, as if it were coiling. Also powerful, vigor. Are you realizing that we are practically finding a meaning of to roll up in the words? And things that seem to have nothing to do with it, it turns out that when you go to the roots, it leads us to roll up. And once again, it is referring us to what is going to happen when, in the second coming of Jesus, when the heavens roll up like a scroll. Therefore, in these words, we are also seeing that this connotation of heaven, earth, heaven, refers us to episodes that happened, but with a special consonance, a meaning that will have to do with the end, right in the final days. The words are giving us the entire message of salvation, precisely up to the very return of Christ. When Christ comes, what will end up happening? Won't he also be a strong God? Won't he perhaps come as a powerful king? Or will he come as a child like when he was born in the cradle? Well, he was born in a cradle. They placed him there in Bethlehem. Yes, he will come as a powerful one, and he will execute. Didn't Elijah execute? God will do the same. Well, this is the key word for practically everything that we are going to discuss today. And it is precisely Carmel, Mount Carmel. We are going to see some photographs of Mount Carmel. You'll see that it's a very beautiful place. Here it is, we already showed it. You can see it's a place where caves easily form. Later, we're also going to talk about this. But down below, you can see there's some interesting vegetation, huh? Here, you have precisely some of the caves that are on Mount Carmel. It is estimated that there are about 1,000 caves. 1,000 caves in that place. You'll see why there are so many. Sometimes when we say, well, if there are 1,000 caves, maybe they're all concentrated on one crag, basically. No, we'll see, that's not the case. We're talking about a considerable stretch of land, huh? But evidently, in one of these caves, someone hid. Elijah, right? Elijah was also in hiding. And we're going to see how someone, once again, has looked for the place where they believe Elijah hid and has done, well, their own thing. But anyway, come on, we'll see that later. Look at another perspective of Mount Carmel. And here are a few more. Do you realize that... Angel, I don't know if you want to tell us something. No, it's just that it's cutting out. The image is cutting out. Oh, okay. Well, these images are precisely showing us something. Sometimes we think that Mount Carmel has to be something very, very enclosed, where everything is super concentrated, but we are realizing that it is an expanse, even with certain flat areas, that a lot of people must fit in that place, right? Yes. What happened when Elijah was there? Was it just him and the 450 and that's it? The whole town. The whole town. I mean, we're talking about a ton of people. Well, they had to fit somewhere. Haven't seen these images? Let's look at Carmel in the Strongs. It tells us it's a mountain on the coast of Palestine. And when we see the reference is 3,760, where it appears in 1 Kings, and it tells us that it comes from Carmel in Hebrew. Carmel, the name of a hill and a town in Palestine. Field, Carmel, Mount Carmel, fruitful, fertile. Look at how what Carmel means is already something related to fertility. Why do you think that the followers of Astarte were also present there? It's quite an interesting question, isn't it? Who is the goddess Astarte? The goddess of fertility. And she was in a place that was precisely known as Carmel because it was a fertile place. Fertile as land. Carmel, we are seeing more meanings. It tells us sown field, orchard, garden, vineyard or park, garden produce, abundance, field, ear of grain, fertile, fruitful, wheat. It is indicating to us that Carmel is not a dry place, that nothing grows there, not even a shrub. No. It is indicating to us that Carmel is a place like a garden. It is an orchard. There is great vegetation and, therefore, produce from the field. And then we see that it also refers us to karem from a root that is not used, which tells us that of uncertain meaning it seems to be garden or vineyard, grape, meadow, vine, vineyard. With all these words, automatically, I don't know if it makes you think of someone. Are these words applicable to someone or not? David, I am the vine, Jesus said, right? And you are the branches. Well then, it is making that significance for us. Mount Carmel is not just, look, a mountain and that's it, but rather it had a parallel with whom? With Jesus? Therefore, everything that happens there is something that Jesus will also end up doing. There is a parallel. We have seen that Elijah was God's representative as such, and we've seen it in many other things. Take a look at this text that appears in Jeremiah 46:18. And you might say, and now what does Jeremiah have to do with 1 Kings here? As I live, says the king, in capital letters, whose name is the Lord of hosts, that as Tabor is among the mountains, and as Carmel by the sea, so shall he come. What is this text talking about? As Carmel by the sea, so shall he come. What is this text referring to? To the coming of Jesus, right? Of course, I'd be happy to help.
Lush.
What did you say?
Beautiful. Lush.
Of course, everything is totally linked to Jesus. Carmel by the city. Mount Carmel by the sea, also because of the climate. What did it consist of? Well, that it was full, like an orchard, something alive, something fertile, something that can be harvested, that bears fruit. Well, that's how Jesus will come, like Carmel by the sea. Look, it's clearly making the point. We would say, I am. Now, we wouldn't say the cypress, but Carmel.
Yes, of course.
Her? Look once again at the importance of pulling on the thread. And that is how he will come. Therefore, he will come to gather his own.
Let's remember that in Capernaum, it was on the coast of the Sea of Galilee. We saw the meaning of Capernaum yesterday.
And this is no longer on a lake, but on the sea.
On the sea?
But it's practically the same thing. Sure.
He went there to rest.
Yes. There is always a correlation in many details that keep leaving us perplexed continuously. But look at this text that appears in Isaiah 35. We are going to read from 1 for the moment up to 10, where it tells us, the desert and the wasteland will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom like the rose. It'll blossom profusely and will also rejoice and sing with joy. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God. Look at how it is speaking about something that also flourishes in certain places that seem to be the least suitable, like a desert, wasteland, and so on. And everything there flourishing, it tells us it will rejoice and sing with joy. You were talking about the Jubilees, right? Jubilation has a total significance with the Jubilees. It's being content, happy about something. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. Who is it said is like the rose of Sharon? Because before it spoke to us about a rose too, how it will blossom like the rose, and then it speaks to us about Sharon. Who is the rose of Sharon in the Bible? Jesus. Therefore, once again, it is speaking to us about Jesus. They will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God. Who's going to see this? Evidently, some already had the privilege when Jesus was born, and during those 33 years, they were able to be with him. But who else is going to see him? The saved of all ages. And when is all this going to happen? At the second coming of Jesus. Strengthen the tired hands, steady the weak knees. What does this mean? Well, it's painting a difficult situation for us. Steady, weak knees, tired hands. It's someone who isn't doing very well, right? But who has to strengthen themselves, has to steady themselves, has to fight for this? Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong, do not fear. Behold, your God comes with retribution, with recompense. God himself will come and save you. Is it talking about the first coming of Jesus? This text refers to when Jesus returns for the second time, he gives his retribution, he gives his recompense. Then the eyes of the blind will be opened and the ears of the deaf will be opened. Isn't that how it's going to be? Of course. But look, because if this text refers to the second coming of Jesus, what do you think Satan is going to do? Doesn't Satan make almost perfect counterfeits? Well, think about the fact that the moment Satan appears posing as Jesus, he will perform miracles. And real miracles. You won't just say, wow, this is magic, and that's it. No, that'll actually happen. Although, obviously, it's not a miracle from God, of course. So, the lame will leap like a deer, and the mute tongue will sing. because waters will break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. Do you know that the Zionists are already applying this? Because they say they are transforming Israel, that from being a barren, almost desert area, they are giving it life, making it flourish everywhere with water, etc., etc. Well, just look, how they are working, plagiarizing the things of God, using them now to make something appear and prepare the ground for when their Messiah, the false Messiah, appears. The parched ground will become a pool, and the thirsty land springs of water. In the haunt of jackals, in its lair, there will be grass with reeds and rushes. And there will be a highway and a road, and it will be called the Way of Holiness. Pay attention to this that you see here. And it will be called the Way of Holiness. Of course, when we talk about the Way of Holiness, what do we think of? Immediately, the process of sanctification, right? Well, this afternoon, we are going to be in for a surprise, because someone took this Way of Holiness and captured it in some writings and some drawings. And we are going to see who did this and what strange parallel there is in those drawings with a certain tree. No unclean person will pass through it, but he himself will be with them. Whoever walks on this path, no matter how foolish they may be, won't go astray. No lion will be there, nor will any ravenous beast go up on it. They will not be found there, so that the redeemed may walk there. And the redeemed of the Lord shall return, and come to Zion with songs and everlasting joy upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. And we already have the long-awaited millennium here, because Satan is going to plagiarize all of this in a very short time. And people all over the world will say, finally the Messiah has come, and finally we have the 1,000 years of peace that were written about. And everyone is going to believe it. Everyone is going to swallow it. Except for those few poor souls scattered around the world who will say, no, this isn't him. This is the fake one. Don't listen to him. And you can already imagine what is going to happen to you, what is going to happen to us, I hope. All these references, obviously, are telling us about when all evil has ended, but Satan is already trying to claim it all for the very near future. And look at this text from 1 Kings 18, which is the chapter we were dealing with, basically verse 19, which tells us, Now therefore send and gather all Israel unto me, unto Mount Carmel. How many went? All of Israel. Israel was left empty. And where did everyone go? There. Do you understand that Mount Carmel couldn't have been just a little hill with a few pebbles and not much else? It had to be big enough to fit, however many people were there. But God tells them, gather all Israel for me on the mount. How could we substitute Carmel then?
Beautiful, powerful, divine.
Exactly. In other words, come to me, as Jesus said. Do you understand? When Jesus said, come to me, he was referencing Old Testament texts, simply swapping the names for their meanings that applied to him. This blows my mind. Well, no one had ever told me this before. However, when we start seeing all of this, we say, it's just like that. It's obvious. But look, all Israel was there, but who else? And the 450 prophets of Baal. But there was still someone else. And the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. We were already talking about these prophets of Satan, who were divided into those of Baal and those of Asherah. Sometimes I say Astarte. I could call her by many other names, right? Because she has had so many throughout the ages. At that time, for the people of Israel, those people were the worshippers of Asherah. And when we see this, 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, well, look what we get if we start adding. Gives us 13. 450 plus 400, taken as individual numbers, 4 plus 5 plus 0 plus 4 plus 0 plus 0 equals 13. Do you think it added up to 13 just 'cause? Have you ever wondered why there had to be 450 of Baal and 400 of Asherah? Couldn't it have been one more, one less, or both the same? No, they had to add up to 13. You think it's a coincidence that it added up to 13 too? Today, we are going to see how, once again, satanic plagiarisms are still at work, even now on that mountain. And now that we've seen who has taken such ownership of the 13, which was a number that in principle was good, the 12 tribes of Israel, plus who? Plus Jehovah, the 12 apostles, plus Jesus. Someone said, well, 13 is going to be my number. We already know that Satan has appropriated it, but someone else is totally related who gives it power. And that is the Vatican. Today, we are going to talk precisely about what you saw at the beginning in the first image, about that formation, that building that is on top of that mountain, which has to do precisely with them. But now we are going to look at another word, corridor. And you will say, corridor? But this doesn't appear in the text. Have you seen corridor appear in those chapters? Well, don't think I've lost my mind, or maybe do. Believe it, it's all the same. Look, we have been examining texts from Carmel that appear in other places, not just in that text. Book of Song of Songs, chapter 7, verse 5. Your head upon you like Carmel, and the hair of your head like the king's purple. And I look at angel when I say purple. Suspended in the corridors. And what will you say? Are you reaching any conclusions, seeing us? Your head upon you. Christ is the head, we are the body. Like Carmel, like Jesus. And this is what the book of Song of Song is telling us. The book of love between Solomon and his famous beloved, And the hair of your head, like the king's purple. What color is purple, Angel?
It's the color that they gave.
Yes, better with the mic.
It's the color that characterized kings. And the king's purple is, well, a fine cloak that filled, well, that distinguished that king.
But is it a green shade?
No. It's a bluish lilac shade. Between blue and red.
Between blue and red, Right. This is very important because Jesus was also given a cloak when they were slapping him and doing all sorts of things to him, Then they laughed, mocking him. They gave him this cloak. But besides that, what other meanings does the color purple have, Angel? Can we say something now?
Well, Ellen White speaks of his crimson stream, but she also speaks of a purple color of his blood. And we will see why his blood takes on that color. And
intense stuff, he said.
Yeah, I know. It's just
because we don't always catch these details, and this has great significance.
It's just that, notice how when it defines the Old Testament, we're going back to the Old Testament again, it defines the colors blue, purple, crimson. If you look in the Strongs, there are even times when the two colors have the same definition, both crimson and purple, which is a scarlet. Crimson is a scarlet. So it is very specific in defining those shades, which is for a reason.
Well then, we will also talk about that later on in the topics of the Great Deception, the dimensional portals. But look at how that text says, and the hair of your head, like the king's purple, held in the galleries. What does held in the galleries have to do with it? What are the galleries? When we talk about galleries, if we take it in isolation, you might think of two things. Either they are men who start running, they are runners, or they are like hallways or something like that, right? What?
Valleys.
Valleys? Mountain valleys, corridors in between. Let's take a look. The text, as it appears in Song of Solomon 7-5, which you can see is related to Mount Carmel and to Jesus in an impressive way, and to us, therefore, leads us to this meaning, 72:98. And what does it tell us? Raja, from a root that is not used. Apparently, it means to hollow out. Channel or trough. Hollowing out, I think that must remind Angel of some, right? Oh, what happens inside a cypress tree, right?
Hello? Yes, the cypress of...
It has channels inside, right?
Yes. It generates channels. Channels. The fungus.
Look at the latest topics on dimensional portals, where Angel has been presenting precisely this subject, because you're going to realize that once again, things that seem to have nothing to do with each other are totally related. To hollow out, channel, or trough. By similarity, pay attention now, lock of hair for forming parallel lines. Water and trough, corridor, basin. Once again, basin, huh? But have you seen? Lock of hair. What shape does a lock of hair have? Spiral, right? Good. Are you realizing it?
They're wavy hollows, you know?
That is exactly right.
If you remember the photos of the packed cypress, when they made the cuts, you can see how the grooves aren't completely straight, but rather they take on a wavy shape. And let's remember that the tree itself causes it.
And let's remember how you ended the lecture this last day.
At the very, very end.
At the very, very end, God is what?
The cypress.
God is the cypress.
I am Virosh, which is the cypress, and something more.
Therefore, look, when we talk about the curl of hair with that connotation of a spiral, of a corridor, like a hallway, of a channel, aren't we talking continuously about how Jesus will come from Orion? Continuously. Well, this text mentioned Jesus coming from Orion through this channel once again, and related to Mount Carmel. Are you realizing that this is already trying to tell us something? That in Mount Carmel, Indiana, that area, there also has to be a what? Corridor?
Notice how when the trunk hollows out, what is left? A tube, right? It's a channel, it's a conduit. And what did Jesus do? Jesus was the connection between heaven and earth, right? Well, just imagine, you don't need to know much about plumbing. You place a tube, you connect it to one side and to the other end, and what happens? Well, electricity can pass through, living water can pass through.
It's the watering trough.
It's the watering trough.
And Jesus, what did he say he was?
I am living water.
The water of life.
The way. It's a path, too.
Therefore, let's realize how these words, which at first you might say, this word stuff is so tedious, turn out to be giving us an impressive light to relate absolutely everything. But now, look, we're going to show a video, practically to wrap things up. It's short. It's about Mount Carmel. And you're going to see some images that relate Mount Carmel precisely to Haifa, the city with its current name, ancient Joppa. And pay attention to the images you're seeing in this video, or will be seeing in this video, because this afternoon we'll continue so I can show you everything there is. I don't know if there will be time to finish it this afternoon. Hopefully yes, but if not, well, it'll continue. In the meantime, let's play this video. I suppose that after seeing these images, many of us would like to go there to see all of this, which is so beautiful. But you know what? I didn't show it to you to say, look how pretty, but because I don't know if you noticed certain things that appeared in these images with a lot of geometry. And not only that, but what a large number of a certain tree that Angel has been delighted with, which are cypresses everywhere. But as if that weren't enough, we're going to see more things. I don't know if you've noticed, all of this had certain shapes. When you look at it just like that, you say, oh, how pretty. But if we start looking closely, plus what we'll see this afternoon, we'll start to realize how strange these gardens are, which lead precisely to this, to Mount Carmel. And that thing over there, we'll see that it's not a Catholic church, which is what it seemed like to you, and what many people think, well, this is a Catholic church. It is not a Catholic church. The Catholic Church is somewhere else. And we are going to see what this is and who it belongs to as well. Well, you've already seen that the gardener isn't going to be unemployed because there's a huge area to take care of. And it is truly huge. This afternoon, we are going to do exactly that. We will see Carmel, but from another perspective, from the satanic plagiarism. And I also say Carmelites. Carmelites. Well then, we're going to leave it here. This afternoon, if we have time to edit it all together, we'll continue with the topic. If not, we'll have to leave it for the next day, but I think we'll have time, God willing, at least to show a good portion of it. This afternoon, you're going to be surprised. Once again, satanic plagiarisms have been located in a place that, as you can see, was a place that should have totally represented Jesus. And we will see that, as always, Satan doesn't do things just because. We will also continue with chapter 19 another day, and I will surely be forced, God willing, to have to advance to 20 and 21, because there is also something important there. And that's how Revelation is. And then we will still have to go through Revelation and go back to Genesis and return to this point. Yes, almost. We're laughing, but we're really going to realize that now we'll be forced to. Because let's remember, this topic is what will lead us to discuss the return of Jesus. We will be forced to reread or restudy the Bible in completely different ways, because we're going to see how, scattered throughout the Bible, it speaks to us about that moment, about the return of Christ, and it tells us when He is going to come. For my part, now we're just going to end with a prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, we thank you because your word is so rich. It is truly an impressive treasure that, as we delve deeper into it, helps us to love even more what you have left for us. We realize that to reach that depth of wealth, one must dig, one must search underneath. We cannot settle for the surface. The end times are already coming to an end. There is little time left until your return, and help us not to waste time. And thank you, because with all that you show us, Lord, you make us enjoy your word. We truly feel joyful anticipating that Jubilee, which will be the moment of your return. Bless us, Lord, and continue to give us light so that we may prepare a people for your coming, and that we may be among them. Forgive our sins, for we ask all this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. We are going to continue with the topic where we left off this morning, precisely at the moment when we were going to talk about something regarding Carmel. We will see that we will still talk more about Carmel, but we are going to start talking about Carmel from a slightly different perspective. We are going to see the satanic plagiarisms that have also acted and are acting there, and we are also going to see something related to the Carmelite nuns. We will continue to see even more things regarding the matter of Catholicism in that area, and we are going to see to what extent there has really been a tremendous operation there, but not only on the part of the Vatican. Not today, because there won't be enough time, but we assume that, God willing, next time we will. We are going to deal with someone else who is in that same area and who is very important when we pull the thread to know how what is there can affect a great many people in general. Let's get straight to it now, focusing first on this Opus Dei and Mount Carmel. Yes, Opus Dei also deals with something regarding Mount Carmel. And today we are going to read quite a few paragraphs now from a piece written by Opus Dei, but also later on in the topics we will be covering. What we are going to see, once again, is something we must keep in mind. Test everything and hold on to what is good, said the Apostle Paul. In this light, we will begin to read what they tell us precisely, as you can see on this page of Saint José María Escrivá de Balaguer, founder of Opus Dei. Look at how this documentation that appears here, consisting of articles and studies, tells us Mount Carmel, Sanctuary of Stella Maris. Well, this looks promising, huh? Let's take a look. Here we have a map to get our bearings. Once again, we see on the left side of the map the Cape of Haifa and where Stella Maris is marked. As you can see, it's the Mediterranean area. Well, they provide history regarding what happened there, but we're going to focus on a series of facts that are very good and that will clarify a series of concepts about that whole situation where Mount Carmel is precisely located and something related to it. Carmel is a limestone mountain range that breaks off from the Samaria system, extending toward the Mediterranean and ending in a promontory above the city of Haifa. Let's remember that this morning we practically finished by looking at that city of Haifa. It has a length of about 25 kilometers and a width that ranges between 10 and 15, with an average altitude of 500 meters. I have to tell you something. I think it was this morning that I told you Haifa was ancient Joppa. Sorry, that is not the case. Haifa is not Joppa. They are two different towns. Its name derives from karam, which means orchard, vineyard, or garden, always with the added nuance of beauty. It fits reality. Abundant springs sprout in this mountain range, so a rich and varied, typically Mediterranean flora grows on its hills and gorges. Laurels, myrtles, holm oaks, tamarisks, cedars, pines, carob trees, matchstick trees. Here it is telling us that this is what we said this morning, like an impressive, very varied garden. But did you notice that when we showed images of Haifa, there were also gardens inside the city, which is completely touching Mount Carmel, gardens made by man. Not things that grow naturally, but planted by human beings. Everything very well arranged, very beautiful. We didn't see who that belongs to, did we? Well then, next time we are going to cover it in depth, and we will talk about why, if Carmel is already a beautiful natural garden, why someone else has also made an extra garden there. That has a meaning, because it does. This fertility has always been proverbial, and in several books of the Old Testament, it appears as a symbol of Israel's prosperity or also of its misfortune in the event of desolation. The Lord roars from Zion. He raises his voice from Jerusalem. The shepherd's pastures are in mourning. The summit of Carmel dries up. And here's where all those biblical texts appear, where they are located. Look at how Opus Dei also quotes the Bible, huh? And very well documented. There are also numerous caves, up to more than 1,000, particularly to the west, with a narrow opening but wide capacity. The history of Carmel is intimately linked to the prophet Elijah, and this image you see here in the photograph, you'll say, hey, what is this? The remains found in Wadi Asiya date back to the 12th and 17th centuries. These remains, which are in that area, automatically lead us, given these centuries, to think that it is something very religious and perhaps theoretically very close to Christian beliefs. Let's see what else they're telling us. Let's follow the text in red. Hey, look at this. In these places, venerated since the dawn of Christianity, where churches and monasteries had been built in memory of Elijah, they say the Carmelite Order was born. Its origin dates back to the second half of the 12th century, when Saint Berthold of Calabria, a crusader of French origin, gathered around him some hermits who lived scattered in the Wadi, in the Mount Carmel area near Haifa. They built a sanctuary there, and a little later, around 1200, another one on the western slope. Therefore, too, in Wadi Asiya, which are these images you see here, Saint Brocard, successor to Berthold as prior in the early years of the 13th century, asked the Patriarch of Jerusalem for official approval, and a rule that would organize the religious life of solitude, asceticism, and contemplative prayer. This is the Rule of Carmel, also called the Rule of our Savior, which remains in effect to this day. What could he be referring to with the Rule of Carmel? Well, we'll see why Carmel, a feminine name, appears in all of this, and this order, of course. Here we will see more things that we are going to skip, and we'll go to this point. Under the altar, look at the photo, a cave commemorates the presence of the prophet Elijah on Mount Carmel. In addition to Stella Maris, the Carmelite Order has another sanctuary at the southern tip of Mount Carmel, at the Mohraka, known as the Sacrifice of Elijah. It commemorates the episode of the prophets of Baal already mentioned. However, only ruins remain of the ancient monastery founded in Wadi Esiag, currently Nahal Siag. If you've noticed, it tells us that in addition to Stella Maris, there is this other one. But the name Stella Maris, does it lead you to any possible appreciation? Does Stella Maris ring a bell here? What does Stella mean and what does Maris mean? Well, let's keep looking. The custom of the scapular. What is it talking about now? A scapular? You know what a scapular is, right? There's even a soccer team that wears a scapular on their uniform. It's like, just to say, a V that goes from the shoulders and joins at the chest, approximately. Maybe a little lower, depending on the scapular, right? Throughout the centuries, the Carmelite Order has gifted Christendom with countless spiritual treasures. Just think about the exemplary lives and teachings of Saint Teresa of Ávila, Saint John of the Cross, or Saint Therese of Lisieux, all three named doctors of the Church. Pay attention to this. These three figures are named doctors of the Church. Therefore, what they say carries impressive weight within Catholicism. And notice that they are related to the Carmelite Order. Today, we will see what these people, or some of them, did that was so important. And that is where the surprises will start to come in. Among those riches, the custom of the scapular also stands out, which Saint Josemaria, referring to the founder of Opus Dei, lived and spread. Wear the holy scapular of Carmel upon your chest. Few devotions, there are many and very good Marian devotions, they say, have such deep roots among the faithful and so many blessings from the pontiffs. Besides, that Sabbatine privilege is so maternal. Are you seeing what word he is using? This appears in the Way. You already know it is a fundamental work of Escriva de Balaguer, the Way. In section N, number 500. You know that this book, The Way, consists precisely of 999 parts. Later we are going to see something about the number 9 as well. No, not today, but next time, God willing. And we are going to see why he used 999. But I don't know if you have noticed that he says this scapular is highly blessed by the pontiffs. And the word he uses, he says, this Sabbatine privilege is so maternal, like an exclamation. It is a Sabbatine privilege. Sabbatine, where does it come from? From Sabata in Catalan, meaning chew? No, from Sabbath, from Saturday, from rest. What does the scapular have to do with Saturday? Well, let's see. The scapular assures those who wear it with piety two prerogatives: help to persevere in good until the moment of death, and liberation from the pains of purgatory. My goodness. So if you wear the scapular and you wear it until the moment of death, what do you get? Well, something very good, huh? Eternally, something very good. And something very clear, which is that the pains of purgatory, you skip them. According to their beliefs, because they're the only ones who believe in purgatory. Since it's not in the Bible, they said that this exists, and bam, and there they put it. But anyway, let's see what else there is regarding this. The beginning of this devotion takes place in 1251, during a moment of special contradiction for the order, which was taking its first steps in Europe. According to an old version of the catalog of Carmelite saints, you see, they even have a catalog, which is at the base of the story of a certain Saint Simon. Identified later as Saint Simon Stock, an English prior general, he insistently turned to Our Lady with the following plea. By the way, on the right, you can see the image of the Virgin of Mount Carmel of Stella Maris. Is the Virgin alone there? She's holding someone in her arms, right? Well, we already know that when Catholicism shows images of the Virgin with the child, it is not actually referring to the Virgin Mary with the baby Jesus. We have already seen it throughout all the conferences of the Great Deception. Rather, it is Semiramis with her son Tammuz in an adaptation to Christianity. But anyway, let's keep looking at more things. What was the plea that this man was making? I'm not going to read it to you in Latin. I'm going to read it to you directly in the words translated into Spanish. Flower of Carmel, flowering vine, splendor of heaven, fruitful and singular virgin. Oh, sweet mother, unknown to man, grant privileges to the Carmelites, star of the sea. Stella Maris is star of the sea. Automatically, when we see that it's making reference here to Star of the Sea, who's it referring to? To Jesus? No, it's referring to the Virgin. In response to his prayer, the Virgin, would you believe it, appeared to him carrying the scapular in her hand. She had nothing better to do than bring him a scapular. And she said to him, "This is a privilege for you and all your own. Whoever dies wearing it will be saved." A longer version states, "He who dies wearing it will not suffer eternal fire. He will be saved." In other words, no more hell or anything like that. Just bam, saved. The scapular was then part of the religious habit, that is, the attire, although originally it had been a work garment used by servants and artisans. It consisted of a strip of cloth with an opening to put the head through that was worn over the tunic and hung over the chest and back. Aren't there Masons who wear something similar too? How strange, right? Well, let's look at the Sabbatine privilege now, because of course, if we see Masons wearing this, did the Virgin give it to the Masons too? Well, that's another topic. The second prerogative, known as the Sabbatine privilege, comes from a medieval tradition. The Apostolic See established in 1613 through a decree that the Christian people may piously believe in the help of the Blessed Virgin for the souls of the friars and conferors of the Order of Carmel who have died in a state of grace, have worn the scapular, have observed chastity according to their state, and have recited the little office. Or, if they do not know how to read, have kept the fasts and abstinences established by the Church, and that Our Lady will act as their protection, especially on Saturday, on the day dedicated by the Church to the Mother of God. Well, how many times have we talked about Sunday as the change in the law of God, which Catholicism has promoted as much as it could and more? But did we know that Saturday is the day dedicated, especially for them, to what they call the Mother of God, to the Virgin? Do you know, this is really strong because this is a point that can be a nexus of communion between Sabbath keepers on one hand, whether they are Adventists, even Jews, or also Catholicism. Look at the extent to which there's always impersonation, usurpation by Satan of what is God's. He is no longer content with just saying, "You say Saturday, well now I'll set Sunday." But he also says, "And since you also say Saturday, I'll appropriate that too." Because we already know, and we have seen it so many times in the conferences on the Great Deception, when Satan says this, it is that he truly appears posing as the Virgin. And from there on, you already know what comes next, to confuse. But look at what he continues to say. That is to say, the Sabbatine privilege is based on a truth of common Christian doctrine: the maternal solicitude of Saint Mary to ensure that the children who are atoning for their sins in purgatory reach the glory of heaven as soon as possible through her intercession. And this says that it is common Christian doctrine. I am a Christian, and this is not common doctrine for me, because this is a false doctrine that in truth is not Christian. In the Bible, we do not find a single place where the Blessed Virgin Mary, whom they emphasize so much, is the one who manages to act as our intercessor to heaven. This is a biblical aberration, which is something very different. Well, then look also at the photograph you see on the right, where it tells us at the northern end of Mount Carmel stands the current monastery and sanctuary of Stella Maris. It's that building. The text continues, at the same time that the Carmelite Order was developing, especially in the 16th and 17th centuries, thanks to various reforms, its confraternities also spread. They attracted many faithful who, without embracing religious life, participated in the devotion to Our Lady spread by Carmelite spirituality. They manifested this by wearing the scapular, which simplified its form until it became 2 squares of cloth joined by a ribbon to be worn around the neck. Look, it's precisely the Carmelites who, are the ones who heavily promote devotion to the Virgin Mary, and especially with the scapular. This scapula has a V shape. If I must remind you, look for the Great Deception conferences, where we showed that even in ancient times, certain symbols appeared engraved in certain places, like a V. And we realized that all of that has a special, totally satanic significance, and that, as expected, Hollywood used it, or television series, in the famous lizard series, V. Well, we explained all of that at the time. Look for it. I don't even remember which conference it was anymore, but if you look in the indexes, you'll surely find it. But once again, this symbol comes from somewhere, huh? The Apostolic See has intervened on numerous occasions to promote this custom, attaching to it the power to gain indulgences and establishing some practical matters. Did you notice what it said? Attaching to it the power to gain indulgences. What does gain mean? Well, to make money from indulgences. The scapula was a tall tale, to put it in a way so you understand me, to make money. And furthermore, I said, it says that it established some practical matters, such as the imposition ceremony, which only needs to be received once and can be performed by any priest, the blessing of a new scapular that replaces one already worn out, or the possibility of substituting the cloth one with a medal featuring the images of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Most Holy Virgin. That, it's all valid, right? There you have it. A few years ago, when the 750th anniversary of the giving of the scapular, the apparition to Saint Simon, was celebrated, Blessed John Paul II, who had worn it since he was young, summarized its religious value this way. There are 2 truths evoked by the sign of the scapular. On one hand, the continuous protection of the Most Holy Virgin, not only along the path of life, but also at the moment of passing into the fullness of eternal glory. And on the other, the certainty that devotion to her cannot be limited to prayers and tributes in her honor on certain occasions, but must constitute a habit, that is, a permanent orientation of Christian conduct, imbued with prayer and interior life through the frequent practice of the sacraments and the concrete practice of spiritual and corporal works of mercy. When we say corporal, you already know what that means too, right? Which sometimes results in self-inflicting some kind of injury to the body. Look at how once again John Paul II, whom we have spoken about as a figure on more than one occasion and showing really strong things, is promoting the scapular as a habit of Christian conduct. But above all, it must serve to guide us. Now, Every time we hear the word guide, we certainly see a totally different concept, huh? In this case, it'll be anything but guiding you where you need to be guided, which is to Jesus, his cross, Orion. Then he continues saying, in this way, the scapular becomes the sign of the covenant. Look at that, huh? The scapular is a sign of the covenant and reciprocal communion between Mary and the faithful, for it concretely translates the entrustment that Jesus made on the cross of his mother to John, and in him to all of us, and the entrustment of the beloved apostle and of us to her, who is constituted our spiritual mother. Look at where the concept that the Virgin Mary is the spiritual mother of us all comes from. From when Jesus says to John, "Here is your mother," and to her, "Mother, here is your son." And it says you've already seen it too in the conferences on the Great Deception, how this is the perfect excuse to say, that's it. This is the adoration we must have, the devotion towards the Virgin as the path to lead us to Christ. And what does Satan achieve with that? Well, to remove the process that in truth should be of Jesus as high priest. That role is conferred upon the Virgin. These ideas are contained in the words the celebrant pronounces in the blessing of the scapular. God looks with kindness upon these servants of yours, who receive this scapular with devotion for the praise of the most holy Trinity in honor of Saint Mary the Virgin, and make them an image of Christ, your Son, and thus, having happily finished their passage through this life, with the help of the Virgin Mother of God, may they be admitted to the joy of your mansion. Do you realize once again how Satan, when he appropriates the role of the Virgin Mary, it is to place himself in harmony with the Trinity? Placed there, he wants to be there. He wants to be like God once again. When speaking about our relationship with God, Saint Josemaria frequently encouraged us to become like children, to recognize that we always need the help of grace, and he also taught us to walk that path by the hand of Our Lady. And of course, he wrote, because Mary is a mother, devotion to her teaches us to be children, to love truly, without measure, to be simple, without those complications that arise from the selfishness of thinking only of ourselves, to be joyful knowing that nothing can destroy our hope. The beginning of the path that leads to the madness of God's love is a trusting love for the Most Holy Mary. In other words, to reach God, who do you have to go through? Through the Most Holy Mary. Do you find any text in the Bible that says this? Surely not. That is how I wrote it many years ago in the prologue to some commentaries on the Holy Rosary, and since then I have verified the truth of those words many times. I'm not going to offer many arguments here to elaborate on that idea. I invite you instead to have the experience, to discover it for yourselves by treating Mary lovingly. Therefore, to whom? To Satan. By opening your heart to her, entrusting her with your joys and your sorrows, asking her to help you know and follow Jesus. What nerve, right? What nerves? And don't you wonder why there has to be precisely that adoration of the Virgin Mary on Mount Carmel? Weren't there prophets of Baal there? But weren't there also prophets of whom? Astarte, Ashtoreth, Asherah. Asherah was idolized in that place. And we are going to see more writings that will show us how paganism prevailed and has continued to prevail throughout the centuries in that place, transferring the same cult under different names. And Catholicism, quite simply, takes up the adoration of Asherah again, which Elijah had such a hard time cutting off, and they reinstate it. And then they disguise it as Christianity. Well, let's look now precisely at Mount Carmel and the Carmelites. Look at what appears in the Christian wiki about Carmel. A mountain on the coast of Palestine where Elijah defeated the false prophets. There, a love for the mother of Jesus was born, symbolized by the little cloud that heralded rain and the triumph against the false prophets. Do you see where they place the love for the mother of Jesus? In the little cloud that heralded rain. Well, this is just enough to leave you completely stunned. Furthermore, it says, and in the triumph against the false prophets. We have realized that the little cloud that heralded rain is precisely what symbolized the coming of Jesus, the second coming of Jesus, not the mother of Jesus at all. And in the triumph against the false prophets, it simply usurps the place of God when it comes. And what's more, it says that this triumph against the false prophets has to do with all of this. Deep down, what they are actually doing is making the false prophets triumph again by establishing the idolatrous cult that Elijah cut off at the root. But look at what it tells us here about the Carmelites. Religious orders that emerged from the love for the Virgin in Carmel. They didn't emerge from just anywhere, they emerged from Carmel. Founded in Palestine, you can see the whole history here. And speaking of the figures we saw earlier, there are many orders. The most widespread are the Discalced, because there are the Calced Carmelites and the Discalced Carmelites. And we'll see to what extent in history they ended up loving each other so much, huh? Understand me in quotes, okay? Because it was quite the opposite. And who was involved in all of this? Well, St. Teresa and St. John with 3,500 members, and the Chalced of St. Simon with 2,000. That's a lot of people. What we are going to see now is a piece written by someone who titled it, Walking with Jesus, Pedro Sergio Antonio Donoso Brandt. And we are going to see how he gives us a series of historical references here that are not to be missed, to finish grasping the true magnitude of Mount Carmel, huh? Due to the influence of the male and female Carmelites, you see that there are male and female, huh? In many cities around the planet, there are neighborhoods, schools, hospitals, retreat houses, or streets that bear this name. But we cannot forget that Carmel is, above all, a geographical place in Israel, a mountain that has always aroused the admiration of sensitive people. Those of us who have visited it and have had the chance to stay on its summit at the Discalced Carmelite Monastery will never be able to forget the beautiful views over the Bay of Haifa or the scents of its aromatic herbs. You see, it's right up there, huh? Poets have sung about it many times. Pay attention to this name, Pedro Calderón de la Barca, because in a little while we are going to, I would say, be blown away by him. For example, he has some ballads titled Description of Carmel, which begin like this. In peaceful Samaria, towards where the sun sets, on a mound of emeralds lies a giant of flowers, a green atlas of the heavens. Its beauty is so contrasting that, being heaven on earth, it seems like a mountain in heaven. Well, a very poetic way to describe how beautiful that is and how it's situated, among other things. And look now at what he tells us regarding the geography, flora, and fauna. Very interesting. And hold on tight. Mount Carmel, Indiana, Hebrew, Har HaCarmel, more than a mountain, is a mountain range about 30 kilometers long with a triangular shape. Located in Upper Galilee, in northern Israel, it descends from Haifa almost parallel to the Mediterranean and widens as it moves away from that city, reaching between 10 and 15 kilometers in width. A distinct triangular shape rises up, Mount Carmel. And God manifests himself there, in the place that had been usurped by Satan, where he was worshipped through the cult of Baal and Asherah. Do you think that this triangular shape on that mountain of God is just a coincidence? It could have had the shape of, any other strange shape. No, with a triangular shape. and God manifests himself. Do we still think that the divinity is not truly three persons when he is telling us this continuously through symbols and signs? Haven't we also seen this morning in Sabbath school the quote from Ellen White that spoke to us about symbols and signs, especially that we should have all of that clear? Well, once again, God, who made the mountains, gave this one of Carmel precisely the triangular shape because this was not the work of man. The coastal strip between the mountain and the sea is the plain of Sharon. We have already seen Sharon this morning as well. I am the rose of Sharon, the biblical text said, right? There is precisely the plain of Sharon, which runs from Mount Carmel down south along the entire coast. So it's completely linked to Mount Carmel as well. On the other side of the mountain is the Jezreel or Esdraelon Valley, which we already saw the meaning of this morning. These are the most fertile and productive lands in Israel. Why? Well, because it's as if it were springtime there. That's why it's all so well landscaped by nature, aside from what man has done there, as we also saw this morning. It's a special place, as if it were springtime on Mount Carmel, and we have seen the significance of the second coming of Jesus. It was telling us once again that Mount Carmel, which serves as a powerful symbol of Jesus, is actually pointing toward the moment of his return in the clouds, and it is revealing that this significant event is destined to happen when it is springtime. But if this doesn't seem to impact you just yet, I encourage you to look even further ahead. The rugged northwestern promontory that forms the very peak of this triangle juts out boldly into the deep Mediterranean Sea, appearing exactly like the sharp cutting bow of a massive ship. It is a truly striking sight to behold. The Palestinians call it in Arabic an Ufhebej, the nose of the mountain, and the Jews in Hebrew, Rosh HaCarmel, the head of Carmel. Who did we see was the head? Christ. And who is Carmel? Christ. Therefore, the head, Jesus. And where does it say this is? At the peak of the triangle? Therefore, at the pinnacle. Therefore, do you need me to refer you back to all the latest conferences on dimensional portals? Well, I will have to refer you to that because I know that there are people now watching this series of of sermons. Well, no, these aren't conferences. They are sermons about the third Elijah, and they don't know what it's all about. I have to refer you. Look for the conferences, The Great Deception, and watch especially the last ones from approximately maybe 150 something, where you will see the significance of all this, what importance it has. The very peak of the triangle, the sharp horns reaching upward, the raw power contained within, and the sacred place of God itself, all of this comes together to form a truly profound and singular vision. Well then, what a coincidence that it is a triangle and that it has its pinnacle. What a coincidence. Well then, let's look at this piece here now. Mount Carmel is located in the north of Israel, acting as a natural border between the land of Canaan, today Israel-Palestine, and that of the Phoenicians, present-day Lebanon. Since its slopes are steep, the vegetation was very thick, and wild beasts were abundant. Normally, it was crossed through the natural pass of Megiddo. Here we find the natural pass of Megiddo. If you've noticed, it says that there was very thick vegetation, there still is, and therefore, back then, there were many wild beasts. And Elijah was there, just hidden away, and he stayed there for quite a long time, didn't he? It really was a long while. Did the wild beasts do anything to him? Look once again at the parallel with the time of the end. When we have to flee to the caves in the mountains, and we saw that the biblical texts referred to the fact that the wild beasts of the field would respect us, they would not harm us. And that is in the future. They will not harm us. And once again, we see the whole reflection in the story of Elijah. How many times is it necessary for Ellen White to write to us that what happened at that moment on Carmel and the whole story of Elijah has a special significance for God's people of the last days? But we have said that, look, here's where the natural pass of Megiddo comes out. Look at what it tells us. There, archaeological excavations have found the remains of 20 cities, successively destroyed and rebuilt, each one on top of the ruins of the previous one over the course of 5,000 years. More or less, every time an empire emerged in the area, it was an obligatory passage point to conquer the strategic Canaan, the connecting link between Europe, Asia, and Africa, and to expand, just as the Bible abundantly testifies. Therefore, Megiddo was a strategic place. It was the junction between Europe, Asia, and Africa, 3 continents. That is why the site of Megiddo was a place of great historical battles, and it appears again in the Bible, specifically in Revelation, where the text refers us, therefore, to what also happened in those times of Elijah and in all those other times where great battles were crucial to achieving great things. And the Bible refers to the last great battle being precisely where? In Megiddo, in Armageddon. The wars on the slopes of Mount Carmel were so many and the dead so numerous that the book of Revelation identifies that space as the place chosen by God for the final combat and judgment. And they gathered the kings together in the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Revelation 16:16 is cited. The ancient fortress that defends the pass through Carmel from the lands of Canaan towards the north is interchangeably called Megiddo and Armageddon, a corruption of Har Megiddo, the Mount of Megiddo, also transcribed as Armageddon in 3 different ways. Do you know? Currently, there are many great theologians, eminences of those who study so much, who already say that this place doesn't matter anymore, that this area is now a laughing matter for armies, because they pass by in planes, they pass by with ships, they pass by with, well, not ships, with tanks, etc., etc., crossing the Euphrates River precisely, etc., etc. And that, therefore, militarily, this will imply absolutely nothing. But there is a problem, and it is that since we don't see that precisely Daniel chapter 11 final verses are speaking to us about literal places, we are not going to perceive that at the end of times there is going to be a great war precisely there. And it is because that area is going to be a key place once again. But, well, that is another story that will take us a long time to talk about, and perhaps, God willing, later on we will be able to do so. It is said that its height dominates over the sea as a symbol of stability, of strength, of the power of God, who is going to act in favor of his people, overcoming their enemies. And look at what text he cites from Jeremiah 46:18. As surely as I live, says the king, whose name is YHWH, that is Yahweh of hosts, that someone like Carmel, which towers over the sea, will come. Quite a text, huh? Someone like Carmelo is going to come. Who did we say this morning was Carmelo? Jesus is going to come, who rules over the sea. And we have seen that the sea had the connotation of what? Crowds, peoples, nations. Therefore, over the world. Jesus will return, and will return as king, as sovereign, who is the one who rules. And all of this, evidently, related once again to Mount Carmel. In other ancient extra-biblical texts, Carmel also serves to evoke beauty, fruitfulness, strength, or the faithfulness of God. The Holy One, blessed be He, said to Israel, "Your head is like Carmel. I love your poor as I loved Elijah when he was on Carmel, Ken Rabbah." Anyway, you can see what a paraphrase that is, because there are people who already saw this coming, right? Now look at what it tells us about the religious significance of the mountain. For at least 3,000 years, we have documented the uninterrupted presence of sanctuaries in honor of Canaanite and Phoenician deities on Mount Carmel. When Elijah confronted all of that, it was already customary. That was already, common, but it continued to be so afterwards because Elijah didn't last forever. We can see that when the prophet or his successor finishes their role, what does the people go back to doing? Scattering and returning to idolatry. In fact, in Egyptian inscriptions from the time of Thutmose III, it is called Ruskedet, which means sacred cape. Look at how paganism was already very clear that this place was a sacred cape. What is a cape? Obviously, we already know it's that piece of land. We've also seen how it jutted out like the bow of a ship from the front towards the sea. That is a cape. But a cape is also the end of something, right? Hand me the end of the rope. But does that rope have one end or two? Look at how paganism already knew that. On Mount Carmel, there is something that connects heaven to earth. And we have already seen in the Great Deception lectures how wherever that always exists, Satan tries to position himself and intercept the communication from heaven to earth and pass himself off as the divine part. And there are quotes from Ellen White that we'll show soon, showing that what I'm saying is not just made up. And we are going to see some quotes from Ellen White that are not to be missed, and that sometimes go so unnoticed when we read. The Syrian philosopher Iamblichus, from the 4th century, in his book Life of Pythagoras, you already know that Pythagoras was also involved in what? We saw it, right? Secret societies, shady stuff. He explains that he retired to live in the solitude of Mount Carmel before his trip to Egypt. And why did he go to Mount Carmel? He also wrote that Mount Carmel was the holiest of all mountains, which is why access is forbidden to the majority. And how did he know that this was the holiest place of all the mountains? Was Pythagoras a Christian, perhaps? But Satan does know things, doesn't he? Satan masters things very well that we sometimes still don't know about. Since the 3rd century BC, it was an important center of worship in honor of Zeus. In the convent, look at that coincidence, of Stella Maris, a marble foot is preserved as a votive offering to Zeus Carmelis Heliopolitanus. Helio means sun, right? And why do they specifically preserve the marble foot of Zeus, the Zeus matter, related to the sun? Zeus, the god par excellence, right, of the Greeks, and related to Helio, to the sun. And where is this? At Stella Maris, which is Catholic. Do you still believe they are there? Look, because they didn't know what to do and they went there and that's it. The Roman historian Tacitus states that in the year 66 AD, Vespasian went to Mount Carmel. For what? To consult the oracle of the mountain, Oraculum Carmelii, before undertaking his campaign against Jerusalem. They went there to see what the oracle of the mountain said. Someone would appear on the mountain, and what does it mean to act as an oracle? Well, giving a message, right? And curiously, later we will see something that the Virgin Mary does there. Or did the Virgin Mary do there as well, according to what is said, There are numerous archaeological and bibliographic testimonies regarding the persistence of pagan cults in different places on the mountain. In other words, a mountain that God makes so pretty, so beautiful, to give us a special significance of his return. And it turns out that Satan says, yeah, well, that's for me. And that there's a door from here to heaven? Yeah? Well, I'll just put myself right in the middle. Given the centuries-old presence of these pagan cult centers, it is not strange that the prophet Elijah challenged the prophets of the false gods there and chose this mountain to affirm the divinity of Yahweh, the only true God. Was it Elijah who chose the place? It was God who directed him, because it was his mountain. Since Elijah, Carmel became a point of reference for later Judaism, which saw in it a perennial call to the purity of faith and the sincere practice of the clauses of the covenant. Look at the clauses of the covenant, the pact of the people with God, or God with the people. And earlier we saw that someone also used the word covenant for that place, like a scapular, and everything to the Virgin Mary instead of to God. The relationship between Elijah and Carmel is so strong that Palestinians call the mountain Jebel Mar Elias, Mount St. Elijah in Arabic, and numerous places preserve references to the prophet in their names. Elijah's garden, Elijah's cave, Elijah's spring, the place of Elijah's sacrifice, and so on. Interesting, huh? That the current names still say this. It reminds me of when Ron Wyatt, precisely, when he was in that whole area, and others there too, of Mount Ararat, where the Noah's Ark is an hour away. The very ancient names of that place refer to Noah built an altar, the village of the eight, etc., etc. The names of what happened there still persist. The same in this case. And we have already seen how, precisely, Noah's Ark, and we saw it in the last conference, basically about the Great Deception, is the total symbolism of salvation in Christ and of the second coming of Jesus and of our transport in that boat to heaven. I don't mean in Noah's Ark, precisely, understand me. Well, all of this also connects with Elijah. Elijah as a representative of the determining factor of the moment of Jesus' second coming to be transported to heaven. The three aspects unite us. Even some plants that grow in the area. One moment, because this isn't changing for me. Let's see if you can change it from there, please. Thank you. They are called Elijah's beards. And some rounded hollow stones with quartz crystals inside, geodes, which are quite common in the area, are called Elijah's melons or Elijah's plums, depending on their size. The legend about the appearance of the geodes in Elijah's garden is very curious. Tradition says that the prophet was climbing from Wadi Ayanesiya to the top of Mount Carmel on a very hot day. You can see this, right? It's a legend. As he passed by a melon field, he asked the owner to give him one to quench his thirst. The owner, not wanting to share him with Elijah, said, "They are not melons but stones." To which he replied, "Very well, let them turn into stones." That is why the area is also known as the Field of the Curse. Anyway, there's no way for us to verify this, you know? The memories of history, local traditions, and legends have linked Mount Carmel and the prophet Elijah so strongly that they can no longer be separated from one another. On this, the traditions of Jews, Christians, Muslims, and Druze are in agreement. By the way, earlier someone pointed out a detail to me, and I have to make reference to it here. We talked about the corridor this morning, right? And a corridor as such does indeed also appear in those texts of Elijah. And it's when Elijah gave Ahab the message to get ready because it's going to rain. And one prepares his chariot to leave with the chariot. And Elijah gathers up his skirts and, tightens his belt, right? His belt. And what does he do? Hop! He starts running and overtakes the chariot. I mean, he must have reached an impressive speed, huh? Well, certainly that's not just a man's feat. There was something divine in it too, right? It means he gets ready, he hurries. Elijah was also a runner. It continues telling us here, the religious importance of Elijah's feats on Mount Carmel made the people look at the whole mountain with special affection and associated it with new, always positive meanings. The abundant flora and fauna also helped with this. In such an arid land, it became a symbol of beauty and fertility. Like Jesus, right? Its beauty is used to complement the bride in the Song of Songs. Look at the text we used earlier. Your head is like Carmel. How beautiful you are. Song of Songs 7, 6-7. And even to sing of the beauty of the future Jerusalem, to which the splendor of Carmel will be given. And it cites Isaiah 35, verse 1 for us. Look at the significance, that Carmel comes to have. The future Jerusalem. And I'm not even talking about shapes anymore, because you've seen that if Carmel has a triangular shape, even though Jerusalem has a square-shaped wall, it also has a triangular pinnacle shape towards its height, where the throne of God is finally above. Let's remember that. And what do we have here now? Well, look, description of Carmel and praises of St. Teresa, a romance. But who writes it? I told you before, pay attention to Pedro Calderón de la Barca. Well, look at what this gentleman writes for us here, who I suppose, for those of you who are a certain age, when you were little, you were made to read his texts. I remember, well, it's been too many years now, how precisely in a normal school we were made to read Pedro Calderón de la Barca. It is also true that, of course, in Spain, Catholicism reigned in a brutal way in those times. Well then, look at what we read about it. In peaceful Samaria, where the sun sets, in a mound of emeralds lies a giant of flowers. Look at how this is already the second time we see the sun setting. Why? The sun was rising from the east. And where is this located within the region of Israel? In the west, in where the Mediterranean Sea begins for them. Therefore, in this sense, it is the reverse of us, who are right at the other end of the Mediterranean. For us, the east is the area where they are, and the sun sets on the other side, precisely. But look, why do they keep telling us this continuously, that the sun sets over there? Once again, we realize the importance of that area, of Carmel. The sun appears on one side, in the east, and sets over there. Christ appears in the east and is going to set in the west. Mount Carmel, with its triangular shape, is symbolizing many things. Among them, realizing that the divinity will come from the east and will show itself to the west. But it continues saying, green Atlantean of the heavens. Its beauty is so contrasting that, being heaven on earth, it seems like a mountain in heaven. Are you not perceiving the comparison it is making between heaven and earth, between that mountain and the sky continuously? Blocking the wind's path, it rises to the sphere where a piece of the sky would be one of the colors. Well, sometimes to understand poets, you need a special mindset, They couldn't just dedicate themselves to writing novels. But anyway, look. A piece of the sky would be one of the colors. But before that, it makes a reference for us. It rises to the sphere. It rises to the sphere. We have seen that the doors always what connotation they have of a sphere. This gentleman is telling us that this mountain has vital importance. He is basically talking to us about an appearance of the sun. And furthermore, about that heaven-earth relationship with a sphere up there. Do you see this as something very normal? Because in biblical texts, thanks to that analysis of the words we've seen, we realize that this is how it is. But if we don't know those words, it's hard for us to find that in the biblical texts as we normally read them. This is starting to raise some suspicions, right? Without the sun sheltering in waves, the horizon is denied to it, and it makes the day turn to night when the night dawns. What do the biblical texts say will happen when Jesus returns? It will be midnight, but the sun will suddenly rise, and then the sun will start doing strange things. And not just the sun, but something else around it. And this gentleman is describing exactly the same thing to us. Curious. And he says, without the sun sheltering in waves. We talked about those waves earlier too. This one then, whose plants, even in their variety, are consistent, are the celestial cultivation of that noble gardener. With, well, if we were to say this is a totally Christian writing, just like that, who do we liken that noble gardener to? Who is the gardener in biblical texts? The one who says, no, wait, I'm going to fence it in, huh? I'm going to watch over everything so it grows well. Is it Jesus? But for the dark world, is it Jesus? Let's see even more. Of that venerable sun that in a more luminous carriage through an ecliptic of wind, a planet of fire runs. That in a more luminous carriage. Carriage? What carriages did they have? Carriages pulled by horses, right? Now here, at least in Spain, I know that in Latin America, the word coche isn't used as much. There, carro is used more, right? Here, a coche is a four-wheeled vehicle with an engine, etc., etc. And luminous carriage, luminous car. What is he talking about? What is he talking about? Through an ecliptic of wind, a planet of fire runs. You can see that he's talking to us about something related to fire, light. Of that one who, ruling rays, burned the swift winds when, scorched, Carmel saw an eclipse of two suns. Mr. Poet, explain it to us, because we're going to get really confused. But eclipse saw of two suns. He is making very strange references to things that seem like they're from the future. This one on the most eminent peak that hides in its light. Look at the peak. Virgin rose, beautiful plant, so that it may be crowned by the sun. Virgin rose. If the rose was Jesus, right? Now here he speaks to us of a virgin rose, pure rose it must be. Beautiful plant, so that it may be crowned by the sun. Chaste lily or soft jasmine, whose colors in vivid aroma the heavens piously gather. If that virgin rose, which could be of purity, we have also seen how the virgin, when she appears, curiously, talks a lot about appearing with roses, but also with fragrances. Fragrances like some of those described here. Holy Carmel, your plant is Teresa, so that you may achieve her beauty without the wind withering or erasing it. This is an ode to Teresa, to Saint Teresa of Jesus. Well then, you can see what implications and what surprises we are going to encounter from now on. But let's remember, what was Saint Teresa of Jesus? A mystic. And Saint Teresa of Jesus has a special mysticism of union in a very sexual way with someone who comes to her and whom she sings of in mystical union with Jesus. That is very intense. And so it turns out that Saint Teresa of Jesus, as we already saw in Dimensional Portals, her mysticism was totally spiritualism. Spiritualism. Knowing all of this, let's take a moment to see, of course, that Saint Teresa of Jesus truly did something quite remarkable. She did something, and some related to the Carmelites, right? But now, first, let's look at Pedro Calderón de la Barca. For some background, he was born in Madrid and lived between 1600 and 1681. He was a Spanish Baroque writer of the Golden Age. You know, that century where Spanish writers were the best, right? It was the peak. Primarily known for his theater work, he wrote plays and was a Knight of the Order of Santiago. Interesting, right? A Knight of the Order of Santiago. We have already seen the clear connection between these ancient orders and matters that eventually became major Templar issues, and also those specific things that later evolved toward the traditions of Freemasonry. It is truly a fascinating historical puzzle to piece together. Take a look at a little bit of this gentleman's history. He started school in 1605 in Valladolid because the court was there, but since he excelled in his studies, he was by no means a fool, his authoritarian father decided to earmark him for a chaplaincy that had been reserved by his grandmother for a family member who would become a priest. You know how prominent families would dedicate one of their sons to becoming a priest? With that purpose in mind, he enrolled. Look where? At the Imperial Jesuit College in Madrid in 1608. Well, there we go. We're starting to see the hand of the Jesuits once again. He continues speaking here, making history. Here you have Pedro Calderón de la Barca, Knight of the Order of Santiago, honorary chaplain to His Majesty, and of the new kings in Toledo. Didn't we see how the Jesuits were precisely the kind of people who always positioned themselves among kings? Why did they end up being expelled from so many places at the end? Because they were pulling the strings of everything, never better said, behind the scenes. I'm speaking like a playwright here. Until what happened, happened. And that's how they always kept all the kingdoms under the power of Rome. A comic poet in whom ingenious invention competed with the urbanity and beauty of language. And look now also at Saint Teresa of Jesus. You know, her name was Teresa de Cepeda y Almada. Also known as Teresa of Ávila, she was a religious woman, a doctor of the Catholic Church, a Spanish mystic and writer, and the founder of the Discalced Carmelites, a branch of the Order of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, or Carmelites. So there were the Carmelites, and Saint Teresa of Jesus goes and says, well, now I'm going to create the Discalced Carmelites. And some wore shoes and others didn't. And why did she create the Discalced Carmelites? You know that those who were mystics had those strange habits of performing some very weird and very intense penances. And bodily suffering was totally linked to their mysticism in order to grow spiritually, or so they said. Curiously, what Opus also continues to promote, flagellations, etc., etc. Well, and why am I telling you about Opus? Because earlier we saw a writing from Opus, and it's also related to all that about Mount Carmel. Look now at the Order of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. The Order of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, also called the Carmelite Order, is a Catholic religious order that emerged around the 12th century when a group of hermits, inspired by the prophet Elijah, retired to live on Mount Carmel, considered the Garden of Palestine. Carmel means garden. We saw that this morning. Garden. What garden par excellence is cited in the Bible? The Garden of Eden, right? And this morning we saw that in Haifa, touching fully on Mount Carmel, there were gardens, right? We still haven't fully seen whose gardens those were. And later you will understand why so many gardens were being made in that area, apart from it being a natural garden in itself. What was especially in the Garden of Eden? Something very special. Animals, the fruits, but especially the tree of life. Keep this in mind because we are going to realize, not today, but yes, God willing, in the next continuation, the importance of the tree of life, of Carmel, and of something associated with that place in Haifa. But anyway, all in due time. Little by little, we will uncover all of that. They have a shield that says, "Zeal for the Lord, God of hosts, consumes me." And well, here it makes a bit of a reference for us. In the middle of the cells, they built a church that they dedicated to their patroness, the Virgin Mary, whom they venerate as Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Now you understand why there are so many Carmens among the women here, especially in Spain, huh? Maria del Carmen, they're usually called, right? Well, it all truly stems from that very specific place, from Carmel. And thanks to the fact that this religious order was first established right there, we have the Carmelites. It is a history that runs quite deep, connecting the origins of the order directly to that sacred location. Look, this is one of their clearest shields, Order of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. You don't have to be very smart to see 3 six-pointed stars. If they are indeed six-pointed stars, we will talk in due time about their significance with 666, a lecture I have yet to give since 2006. My goodness. Well, replace the star with a 6. But also take a moment to really look at how this unique pyramidal shape holds such deep significance, and consider what exactly that meant for them in their daily lives and their broader culture. It is truly fascinating to think about. The mountain, Mount Carmel, which has a triangular shape and at the top a pinnacle, evidently in the shape of a triangular horn. Yes, look at the arrangement of the stars. 2 at the top, 1 in the center at the bottom. We've talked about scapulars, right? The scapula is part of one shoulder and the other shoulder, and it joins in the middle. It's the same arrangement. And I don't know if this leads you to think of something. How can it be that in the year 1200, 6-pointed stars were placed on that shield? Some might say, sure, obviously, because it's in Israel. And in Israel, you know, their flag has the 6-pointed star. But curiously, we have already seen how the 6-pointed star is not something that was truly innate to the ancient people of Israel by any divine matter. Instead, it actually slipped in among them thanks to various pagan cults, which were already using this same 6-pointed star in many other distant places, even as far away as India. And later on, there was the rise of the family known as the Rothschilds, the famous financial dynasty family par excellence, and the primary bankers of the Vatican. Curiously, being at the very highest level of Freemasonry, they were the ones who began to prominently use this 6-pointed star and attach it to their family shields, cementing its legacy. And from there, it was passed on to the Jews of Europe, especially, you know who, those in the areas affected during the Second World War. And then in 1948, the State of Israel was established, and this same star was attached to that flag. In truth, it is a satanic symbol. And curiously, in the 1200s, on their coat of arms of the Order of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, they already established 6-pointed stars. Exactly these stars that serve to worship pagan divinities, satanic representations. Well, that is right there on that coat of arms. Here you also have it regarding the Virgin of Carmen. It makes a bit of a reference to us. Was Saint Mary of Mount Carmel, commonly referred to as the Virgin of Carmen or Our Lady of Carmen, is one of the various invocations of the Virgin Mary. It tells us that its name comes from the so-called Mount Carmel in Israel, a name that derives from the word Carmel el Karem, and which could be translated as garden. There are currently active Carmelite orders, not just there anymore, but spread all over the world, both male and female, which revolve around this Marian figure. Look, if Carmel was all a symbol of Christ, why is everything here anything but Christ, and everything a matter of Marianism? Let's remember Asherah. If we aren't clear that Asherah was idolized in that place, we won't understand why Catholicism was so insistent on establishing itself there, and everything that was written about it by its mystics, which, you'll see, will hold some surprises for us, huh? Look at the image on the right. Once again, Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Origins of the cult? Well, here you have, as expected, the whole history of Marian devotion, the scapular, etc., etc. We are now going to watch a video that, well, if the music bothers you, you can turn it down. You're going to hear the Ave Maria playing throughout the entire video. But it's a video regarding the Carmelites. Pay attention to the images that are shown there, because later we'll also be able to comment on that. In this video about the Carmelites, we have seen a comprehensive series of images showing exactly where they are located, but we have also seen some other images, the same ones we viewed earlier this morning, which were also included in this video, that highlight the beautiful, serene gardens that are situated right there on the grounds. There are two things I want to tell you about. If you noticed, I didn't read this part to you earlier so as not to overload you, but it did appear in the video that at the beginning of those movements there, of those orders, there was more than likely precisely regarding the Crusaders. And you already know that the Crusaders were involved in matters that were more than just esoteric. And why do you think the Crusaders went precisely to that point, to that place where these Catholic constructions later began to be built? You already know that the Crusaders had come to possess great knowledge that they later applied to the constructions they were making throughout Europe with their Gothic cathedrals and so on and so forth. And all of this has a reason for being. Sometimes they did go to certain places because of their battles, right? To set up their bulwarks, so to speak, their fortresses. But they also went to others because they were looking for something more. That happened precisely on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And they evidently knew that in those places there was something more, or something had happened that had implications far greater than human beings. The curious thing about all this, too, is that at the end of these images, we have seen once again those gardens that are in Haifa on the hillside, right next to Mount Carmel. Earlier, I specifically mentioned to you that there was a very important biblical reference to a garden, which was the Garden of Eden, and that in that Garden of Eden, there was the tree of life. But look at how a particular garden stands out in the Bible, or many gardens in particular in the Bible, right in a specific place, and they were of tremendous beauty and were known as one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Could there have been a deeper, perhaps even divine connection linking the legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon to the biblical Garden of Eden? And might these two iconic, lush paradises share more than just their reputation for unparalleled beauty and mystery? No. Sure, if everything was vegetation and everything is made by God, okay, perfect. But in truth, some things were meant to be a way of getting closer through gardens, where worship also took place, to Nome. Well, once again, to the pagan deities, which deep down symbolized Satan and his fallen angels, and which was in no way the same as the Garden of Eden. When we talk about these gardens located specifically in Haifa, we are going to be in for quite a few surprises. But, having said that, let's also look at St. John of the Cross, whose real name was Juan de Yepes Alvarez, also Spanish, from Ávila, and he was a religious figure in the 1500s and a mystical poet of the Spanish Renaissance. He was a reformer of the Order of the Carmelites and co-founder of the Order of Discalced Carmelites with St. Teresa of Jesus. And of course, he is also the patron saint of poets in the Spanish language. We are talking about a type of person who was extremely cultured, very cultured, but who was also a mystic. And we have already seen in what Calderón de la Barca wrote that this writing manifests itself as very mystical. But we are going to be even more surprised. Anyway, when we also look at his whole history, we always see the typical, connections, evidently, that go beyond the normal to become a mystic. Very close to St. Teresa of Jesus, who called him my half-friar, they say because of his size. And that bond wasn't just solidified with her, but also, naturally, the Jesuit college was involved. We always see the hand of the Jesuits in mystical matters, like the Pope, the current Pope, who is a Jesuit, right? Be very clear that for them, mysticism is key. And St. Ignatius of Loyola, who was deep down a mystic, they're mystic par excellence, the founder of the Jesuit order, right? Here it tells us about the whole history, the whole plot. But also, look, a confrontation between Carmelites. For a certain period within the Carmelite Order, jurisdictional conflicts between the Chalcid and Discalcid Carmelites had worsened due to different spiritual approaches to the reform. Furthermore, the dispute was also framed within the confrontation between royal and papal power to dominate the sector of religious orders. How very Christian all of this is, huh? It's a pleasure. Once again, let's keep in mind, the devils fight to the death among themselves. To the death. They fight. They hate each other. But when they work with common goals, which is it's going against the people of God, well, that's when they go together. But they just tolerate each other, nothing more. But as expected, when something created by the devil is transmitted to human beings, the same thing happens. And in these cases, what was it going to be? Well, a fight for power, a fight to stand out, a fight to be in charge, a fight for so many other things. And both of them, curiously, Carmelites and devoted to the Virgin of Mount Carmel. Anyway, they suffered imprisonment. These types of people have always had problems too, even among their own. Here you can see the tomb of St. John of the Cross, which is in Segovia. And it tells us about, well, all of his work in general. This gentleman too, I suppose, some of you studied him in school when you were little, and some of you as adults if you've done any literature in university. Let's see, precisely that he writes poetry. But look at what he writes precisely about poetry. His poetic work is composed of 3 poems considered major: Dark Night, Spiritual Canticle, and Living Flame of Love. But that's not all, because then it continues to tell us in prose he wrote 4 commentaries on his major poems. And look at the title of the first one, Ascent of Mount Carmel and Dark Night. Ascent of Mount Carmel. You have no idea what we are going to see precisely in Ascent of Mount Carmel. Get ready. Look at this coat of arms that appears engraved on a page. Do you see any difference between this coat of arms and the previous one? This is also from what? Well, from the same thing. Carmelite orders. But if you've noticed, something different appears here. We see like a mountain that, in the end, what does it have at its peak? A cross. And we see that here, there are no 6-pointed stars. But what is it that appears here? On the ground, on what would be the mountain, we see, it looks like a sun, right? And above, 2 stars. With how many points? 8, right? Later, not today. Next time, we are also going to analyze these shields so that we realize that when they put something on the shields, it's for a reason. Now we are going to focus on something else. Let's go directly. I'm going to skip this so as not to overload the matter too much. Something that appears here. Mount of Perfection. I don't know if you are seeing the page on the right with this illustration, this engraving. Do you see very symmetrical shapes? Just by looking at it like that. Some symmetrical shapes, right? Well, look at what it tells us here on the left regarding the Mount of Perfection. In his famous drawing of the Mount of Perfection, St. John of the Cross made it so that the straight path of ascent appears flanked by 2 dead-end side paths. The one on the right, the worldly path, points out its dangers: possessing, pleasure, knowledge, comfort, rest. Likewise, the one on the left also marks the dangers of a spiritual path: glory, pleasure, knowledge, comfort, rest. How many of you counted? 5 on one side and 5 on the other, right? 10. We saw that the number 10 applied to whom? To God. Let's continue. The legend on the steps of the central path, the correct one, is especially surprising, on which it reads, nothing, 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 nothing. How many nothings do you count? 6, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5? Once again, it refers us to 5 things. And we will also get to the 5 bars. But in the meantime, look at what it continues to say. As a note on this graphic, the author writes, it gives warnings and doctrine to beginners as well as to the advanced. Very useful so that they know how to rid themselves of everything temporal and not get entangled with the spiritual and remain in total nakedness and freedom of spirit, which is required for divine union. For divine union. This path for them is just that, to lead us to union with someone. I'm not saying God, I'm saying someone. When we have added 5 and 5, 10, and we have said that 10 was the number of God, we must add these other 5 steps of nothing, 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 which makes 15. But what else did we see regarding 15? That everything that was 10 and something had exactly the same connotation of matters of God. But look even further. Some of his short phrases summarize his doctrine well, such as, deny your desires, and you will find what your heart desires. And love does not consist in feeling great things, but in having great nakedness and suffering for the beloved. You can see that these are thoughts that can become very profound, right? Well, let's see. I'm going to skip this. Well, as references and such, in case you want to look them up yourselves, I've put them here for you. Here you have St. John of the Cross. You see him in a position, in this engraving, very mystical, right? You see him with a face. How? Illuminated. And the light, obviously, no, it doesn't come from behind him, but nor from below, it comes from above, and he has his hands raised. But look at what's on the wall. A crucifix. Do you see how the crucifix is drawn? There's another one in the Bible too, huh? Look at this book, St. John of the Cross, Ascent of Mount Carmel. This is, as you can see, super old photos with the ascent of the mount. And on the left, the image we showed you earlier. Here you can see it more clearly. Ascent of Mount Carmel, composed by the Venerable John of the Cross. And all this with the Reformation of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, which St. Teresa founded. St. Teresa founded it. I mean, it doesn't say the Virgin Mary, but St. Teresa, because they say she was also a virgin. You can see that here in the writing is all the doctrine that I intend to treat in this Ascent of Mount Carmel. You can see that it's super old Spanish. It is included in the following songs. Look at how, when they wrote poetry, they also put song. And in them is contained the way to ascend, I know it sounds like I'm missing teeth, to the summit of what is the high state of perfection. Look, it's telling us that it was to ascend to the summit, all the way to the top of the high state of perfection, which here we call the union of the soul with God. They say here that it is the union of the soul with God. And because what I say must be founded upon them, I have wanted to put them here together so that the whole substance may be understood and seen as a whole. Yes, I'm having trouble keeping a straight face because, of course, now there are things that... Well, that's how your ancestors spoke. Don't laugh so much. Well, here in Catalonia, it's another language, but anyway, yes, this was Old Castilian. You're making me lose my place, huh? It's just that you start laughing. So that the whole substance may be understood and seen as a whole. I'm sorry, but I can't hold back my laughter anymore. Of what is to be written, although at the time of the declaration, it will be necessary to place each song by itself, and no more nor less the verses of each one, as the subject matter and declaration may require. This, which is so funny when read like this, is actually referencing how they unite the song with poetry in such a way that they are going to take us to the highest level until perfection is achieved. Well, after the giggles, let's keep moving forward by looking at this page, which is the engraving you saw earlier. Look closely, because later we will also see it in a color image. If you look from a distance, you realize it's totally symmetrical, right? Yes or no? It is symmetrical. If you divide the image of the engraving, the little drawing, in half, the right side is symmetrical to the left side. Both in the little drawings that appear there, in the shapes of little mountains and such, as well as the little paths. The words are arranged, even though they are different, also exactly the same, as if it were a mirror. Do you remember, for example, in Freemasonry, how the double-headed eagle was also drawn in the 33rd degree? You split it in half, and it's the same on one end as it is on the other side. All of this is the well-known mirror reflection effect, which this morning, was it this morning or was it earlier? Now, I don't remember. I told you that Escriva de Balaguer, it was at the beginning of this conference, wrote 999 points in his book, The Way. The mirror effect? What numbers would that give? 666. Well, all of this is part of the mysticism with which they go about giving meanings to things. Well, then here we have seen that there were two paths that they tell us about to reach perfection. Below it tells us, way to come to the all, way to have the all, way to not impede the all, indication that faith has everything. If you look more closely, it tells us a few words on one side, a few on the other, and then at the middle, you will see what it is going to tell us in the middle. If you take a moment to look directly upwards now, right to where the Carmelite shield is displayed, you will find that it tells us something quite profound regarding the mountain itself, as well as the glory and the honor of God. At the very top of this mountain of Carmel. Let's see the same thing in color now. The Ascent of Mount Carmel, a synthesis by St. John of the Cross. What do you see on the sides of the mountain? The tablets of the law. Are they the tablets of the Ten Commandments? Because there are two tablets, one on the left and one on the right. They have that same shape. Do you see it talking about the Ten Commandments here? No, these are not the Ten Commandments. There are other things here. There are other words that have other connotations that evidently can be implied in the Ten Commandments. And up there, what do you see? A little drawing of something with wings, right? Well, if anyone knows what it is, let me know, because I still don't know. But something emanates from there. Light. Evidently, earlier we saw that is where it speaks of the glory of God. It is creating a divine symbology for us, right? Look at this image. I told you, look at the middle. We can't read it very well, let's zoom in on it. While we see different words on the right and left sides, which were those steps, to get up, look at what it tells us here. At the very top, charity, faith, hope. In the middle, there is no path here. For the righteous, there is no law. And below it says, and on the mountain, nothing. Above all, I'm not going to refer to on the mountain nothing anymore, because that's throwing everything away, but rather to focus on what that phrase right in the middle says. Mystical phrase, remember? Mystical phrase. There is no path here. For the righteous, there is no law. Is there no law for the righteous? Or is there a law? Well, because of faith, the law is no longer necessary, some say. Christ already nailed it to the cross. We are already saved, etc., etc. For the righteous, there is no law. Matthew 5, verses 17 and 18. St. John of the Cross didn't write this, thank God. These are the words of Jesus. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or one tittle will pass from the law until everything has been fulfilled. Jesus is crystal clear. He did not come to abolish anything. Nothing, not even the Sabbath, no matter how much that bothers some people, and it bothers them a lot. He came to fulfill the law, not to annul it, abolish it, destroy it, to say, now it's no longer useful. I come, I am going to die for you, and that's... Jesus is crystal clear. Heaven and earth must pass away, and nothing will be removed. Nothing from the law. But look at Romans chapter 3, verse 31, words of the Apostle Paul. Then, do we invalidate the law by faith? By no means. On the contrary, we uphold the law. The law remains in effect. Why do mystics say that there is no longer any law? Because they speak of reaching a point where you are so connected to God that the law no longer means anything to you. What will we be judged by? Based on the law, on the Ten Commandments. Therefore, for us, well, yes, it remains in effect, and we must continue to keep it. Nothing will exempt us from keeping God's commandments. Therefore, faith must also be based on fulfilling the law of God. At the end of time, if we are part of, God willing, the 144,000 who are awaiting the return of Christ while we are being persecuted and going through Jacob's trouble, if in those moments our intimate union with God were to be broken by a sin of ours, no matter how small, we would be left out of the salvation of eternal life. Take a moment to see to what extent the law is always in effect and how it applies to everyone. And the mystics already move past the law. They already surpass it. We must be very attentive, because sometimes the phrases of the mystics are captivating phrases, which remind me of the hissing of the serpent, speaking to whom? To Eve. That hint at a wisdom, You will have wisdom, and suddenly they are giving you the poison. Well then, be careful with mysticism, because this type of mysticism is not the one that comes from God. But you can already see where that mysticism comes from and what it was based on. A Mount Carmel and the devotion to someone in particular. Look at what appears now on this page. You'll see that it's not a waste of time. St. John of the Cross and his mysticism. His real name is Juan de Yepes Alvarez. He is a representative who is rarely taken into account. He was a religious figure, a reformer of the Carmelite Order, the patron saint of Spanish-language poets, and a poet in the literary tradition of the modern age. Here you see him in another illustration, always with an illuminated face, Mystics always have illuminated faces. Illuminated, Illuminati, Jesuits. Curious, And they always paint them so that when they are in these moments, they are moments of where they have an extraordinary mystical contact. And notice how they never draw them with their heads looking at the ground or anywhere else. It's always with their gaze lifted, as if someone is coming to give them a light. This doctrine is restored with the dark night. The night erases boundaries, negation of the soul. He uses the term dark night to refer to the terrible trials that are sent directly to the human being. De la Cruz is very original in mysticism. He names 3 classic powers of the soul, which are memory, the mysticism of hope, understanding, which we call faith, and will, charity or love, seeking a system to find a state of perfect silence. I honestly don't know if you're really noticing this, but these structural forms of mystical thought are actually very typical forms of thought, and I have to ask, of what exactly are they composed? It is a question that really makes you stop and think. Of Kabbalism. They are certain structures of ways of thinking. In a dark night, it says here, inflamed with love's anxieties, oh, happy chance! I went out unnoticed while my house was already quiet. This is the first stanza of Dark Night. He develops a human profile in each of his works: love for God, selfless love, tenderness, freedom, faith, realism, joy, meekness, spiritual beauty, absence of selfishness, conscious sacrifice, delight, silence, inner peace. Do you see anything wrong here? The thing is, no, everything is something that is sublime. In his work, Ascent of Mount Carmel, one of the most prominent works by John of the Cross, he combines prose and verse to express the mystical bond of the soul with God. The ascent of Mount Carmel is, in reality, the path that the soul must travel to reach the high state of perfection. And curiously, he uses the symbolism of Mount Carmel. Many believe that in this work there are intuitions about the unconscious, which would much later be introduced by Freud, and you know that Freud was precisely fully immersed in matters of the dark side. Look here, if you take a close look at this same drawing that we saw a bit more schematized just a moment ago, we start to realize something truly significant and very important about how it all connects together. It really changes our perspective on the whole thing. This diagram helps us understand something that perhaps we didn't know how to see in the other drawing. What do you see as something that rises straight, vertically, and at the top has a shape that opens and closes at the top, opens on the sides ovally, and closes at the top? What figure is it that you would see, looking at the white and yellow at the top and that trunk that goes towards the black at the bottom? It's a tree, right? It's, what would be the tree of what? Of life. Curiously enough, we have seen that the Kabbalists, and indeed the entire occult world that is actively using the Tree of Life, also utilize its image respective to the Sephironic tree, which is a subject we have already talked about quite a lot in these ongoing topics of the Great Deception. It is fascinating to observe how these symbols are consistently repurposed across various esoteric traditions, reinforcing the very patterns we have been uncovering throughout this series. Therefore, what that gentleman was actually portraying in his lecture was a complex, Sephirotic, Kabbalistic, and Jesuit-inspired tree of life. It is a fascinating, deeply layered concept that warrants further exploration. The thing about the dark side is that it always happens with things that seem completely good. This wasn't just Christianity, this was much more. And everything, of course, Mount Carmel, supplanting gods, the Garden of God. Here you have precisely another illustration of Mount Carmel. An illustration that refers to Mount Carmel. I don't know if you are also perceiving something. Look at how there is a central something, once again, and a sphere that would be, once again, the tree. But to the right and left of this trunk, something appears, as if it were two written tablets. Well, all of this can also remind us of something that Jews put on when they have to say their prayers. And if you go to the Jewish Museum here in Girona, you will see that they even have it on display. Everything is very much associated with Kabbalistic matters. Well, anyway, now you are going to see that it appears here in Gulistas Valencians, a blog that delves into the history of Valencian gozos, hymns of joy, for their dissemination as a treasure from the past. And here it tells us, hymns of joy to Our Lady of Mount Carmel by her illustrious brotherhood founded in a parish of the Most Holy Cross of Valencia. As you can see, there are brotherhoods in many different parts of this world based on this, on the subject of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And you're going to see how precisely, well, I'm going to skip this. Let's go straight to this right here. Hymns of Joy to Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And when you read this, you can no longer remain indifferent. We are going to take a break to change the video and get you ready for what's coming next, because it's the main event of this afternoon. All right, so we'll resume by reading just a few snippets of what you're going to see written here. It makes reference to Elijah. It also mixes in the Mother of God, they say, and God. And we are also going to see how in the middle, they then start talking about the scapular, purgatory, etc., etc. And let's go now to the point, on the right of these three columns, which starts to tell us something very interesting. From your Carmel, the variety of saints are flowers. So many prophets, martyrs, virgins and confessors, pontiffs and doctors who make your mountain heaven. They make your mountain heaven. Look at how aware they were that that place was something special between heaven and earth. That they speak of how, ultimately, all of this, even pontiffs, make your mountain heaven. What way is there to make a mountain heaven? Well, the direct connection with the spiritual matter. And evidently, it is not with the heaven where God is, but rather it is precisely with the part of someone who is also in the celestial regions, but who is not God. It is Satan. Then it tells us, giving worship to your honor, Carmel will last forever, because that is how the zeal of Elijah, its founder, achieved it, when Christ on Tabor showed his deity without veils. In short, when you look closely, you can really see to what extent the mixing of things so subtle totally diverts us from the truth. It also gives us a whole series of concepts that are, quite frankly, totally out of place when you consider them biblically speaking. Look, now once more at the shields. You see here precisely what I was telling you about before. And furthermore, above this shield, which has a crown with 3 crosses, there appears above it that hand with a sword, which curiously must refer, I suppose, to whom? Well, to what Elijah did, right? Executing, I suppose. But look at what is also there in an arch, in a vault, 12 6-pointed stars. Afterwards, we also see this other shield, also from the Carmelites, where once again we realize that the peak of the mountain now ends here in the shape of a cross. And we already saw that for them, the cross doesn't really have the same resonance that it has for us. The cross, that passage from the world of spirits, from life to the afterlife, which all pagan cultures or pagan religions of all eras have believed in, and which Catholicism, when it uses it so much, disguises once again to simulate what happened to Christ on the cross. And we have already demonstrated this many times. Well then, I'm going to pause for a moment right here with the only drawing preserved by St. John of the Cross. And I want you to take a good look at this image. I don't know if this reminds you of anything. You can see it's a crucifix with a Christ nailed to it. I don't know if you notice a strange arrangement, the way his hands are and how he's nailed. It's a strange shape and a certain perspective. Well, let's look at this and see what it tells us here, because now comes the part that is not to be missed. St. John of the Cross, in addition to his literary work, was the author of a small body of visual art, almost all of which has been lost. The mystic created several wood carvings of Christ, a sculpture of a virgin, a drawing of the ascent to Mount Carmel, and a small pen drawing of the crucifixion reproduced here. All the originals have been lost, except for the last one, although it has reached us very altered as a result of deterioration and a first, quote-unquote, very invasive restoration carried out as early as the 17th century. This data and much more of a technical nature was provided by the Centavinas, who, after receiving the commission for its restoration in 1968, did the best he could. The original of the Christ of St. John of the Cross, as it is known, just like the Dalí painting inspired by it, is located in the Monastery of the Incarnation in Ávila. According to Viñas, in the original work, the long beam of the cross was vertical with respect to the observer, like this, just as you see in this drawing. I don't know if you've noticed something. The famous painting by Salvador Dalí, which you have been, well, of course, many of you are from far-off places. In Figueres, which is 30 kilometers from where we live in Girona, there is the museum of the well-known painter Salvador Dalí. And he has a painting, specifically of a Christ nailed to the cross, that caused a stir at the time when it was painted. And even when you go to see it now, it surprises you. And it was inspired precisely by this one that we see here. We already know that Salvador Dalí, had some rather strange connections, you know? We've already seen it in lectures. But I don't know if you realize the shape, the perspective from which the crucified Christ is being viewed here. This is Salvador Dalí's painting. It's a very well done painting. Look at what it says here. The unusual point of view of the image has caught the attention of scholars. It has been written that it is that of God the Father, who contemplates from above the Son situated at his right hand. This one, do you understand? Salvador Dalí, impressed by the saint's drawing, painted his Christ of St. John of the Cross in 1951, one of his most popular works, and possibly also the most awe-inspiring. Although Dalí has been accused of being a commercial artist, etc., the vision of this crucified Christ hovering over the world moves anyone. The original is located at Kelvingrove in the Glasgow Art Gallery, where it is one of the main attractions visited by thousands of people. And so we'll leave it there. Okay, this one is impressive. It's also a view from above. And as they were telling us here, they say that this is from the perspective of God the Father. Well, we can see it better here. Now I'm going to do something from memory. I don't know. First of all, if you are seeing a Christ quite similar to the one the Pope wears on the broken cross, on the bent cross, that satanic crucifix of a scrawny Christ, which precisely has its legs sticking out very far forward. But now I'm going to rely on my memory even more. St. John of the Cross, in that engraving, a cross also appears. Don't you remember anything that we were showing precisely in one of the last conferences on the Great Deception? On the left, we see the drawing of the cross of St. John of the Cross. And on the right, we see the cross in the center of the Whirlpool Galaxy, something that left us perplexed. Look closely, because precisely in a perfectly rounded shape, both of them appear right there. It is quite interesting to see how both of them are positioned. But I don't know if you notice a slight difference. The orientation, the perspective, right? One is seen from above, the other is seen from below. One is seen as if someone were looking at the cross almost head-on, a bit, you see, from the side, from above, and the other from the feet of the cross, on one side. One indicates to us that someone was observing that crucified one who was not human. Because above Golgotha, there was no human being floating in the air. There was someone standing nearby, silently watching the entire crucifixion unfold before their eyes. And in the other, we see the perspective of someone who is at the feet of the cross, looking at the crucified one. And the image on the right is an image that was not created by man, but by God. The perspective shown on the right is meant to be our own perspective, as if Jesus is also looking directly at us from the cross, with his eyes fixed upon us, deeply seeking our salvation and inviting us into a profound personal connection with his sacrifice. And we, from below, look up at him, seeing how he dies for our sins so that we may hold on to him and he may grant us salvation. On the left, no. On the left, when we already know the meaning of them, of the cross and so on, what it is denoting to us is that it is the perspective that's not precisely God's, but Satan's, observing from the heavenly places the death, the murder of Christ on the cross brought about by him. You know? If you realize it's just a matter of perspective, but it's a perspective that changes what God comes to seek us with through his death and us taking hold of him. And the other is something of an image that only observes. Jesus is there, and that's it. But now, I'll tell you more. It's curious that earlier I spoke to you about the mirror effect, right? And curiously, we eventually come to realize that these unique people are truly mystics. And mystics are shown profound things that the rest of us mere mortals simply do not see, nor can we even begin to comprehend. But we have already seen that this specific type of mystic, which is clearly of satanic origin, even if they try to pass themselves off as genuine Christians, Satan shows them deep hidden things that we normally do not find out about in our everyday lives. It is a deceptive practice that goes much deeper than we might initially realize. Even when we haven't realized that there is that perspective of the cross of Christ dying for us in heaven, written in the stars, drawn by God. Drawn, so to speak. Well, it seems Satan already showed these mystics something. It's just a matter of mirroring it and using it all for his side. Well, I wouldn't want to end here today. We have seen the satanic plagiarisms using Catholicism to supplant everything divine and the entire project of God, the plan of salvation for man, shown in the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel. We will see even more, and boy, what things we will see. But now I want to give the floor to our colleague who is helping us precisely to record the topic today. And I would like him to tell you a little about his experience related to Stella Maris. I'll hand it over to him so you can hear his testimony from his own mouth. I don't think you'll be left indifferent.
First of all, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me well? Yeah, well, all right. Well, brothers, this came up very suddenly because I didn't know what the conference was going to be about, and the topic of Stella Maris related to the sea and the stars came up. I have to give you some background that I come from Brazilian ancestry, and that since, I was raised in with candomblé, umbanda, and various types of Afro-Brazilian witchcraft, okay? And, speaking of which, my father was a Pai de Santo, priest of candomblé, and I was raised, talking to demons and worshiping them without knowing it, obviously. I thought I was doing something good, okay? So when I reached a certain age, my guardian angel appeared to me, and her name was Yemanja, okay? One was introduced to me as the guardian of the family, owner of the seas, and also related to fertility, okay? So what I had to do in my life to be successful in all my ventures and to be successful in life in general was to give offerings regularly to Yemanja, okay? So what I would do was go on the day that the saint of my father, saint in quotation marks obviously, told me to go to the beach because I live in a coastal town and I had to go to the beach in the afternoon before sunset to give an offering to Yemanja, okay? And, well, I used to go in the middle of summer when it was 30 degrees out. And, well, I live in a town called Premia de Mar, okay? You can look it up on Google Maps. And, well, it has a beach. Well, that maybe is like two kilometers wide, okay?
Located in Barcelona.
In the province of Barcelona, yes, here in Spain. By magic, or by the twists of fate, let's say, every day that I had to go make the offering, whether it was summer, winter, whatever time of year it was, but let's say in summer, which is when most people go, well, it's going to surprise you. At 30 degrees, at 20 degrees, 25, on vacation. At the time I had to go make the offering, that beach, 2 kilometers in diameter, in width, was empty so that I could make my offering. I was told beforehand that I was going to be alone, calm, and that a spiritual person would always come by to watch over me to make sure I was doing what I was supposed to do. And indeed, it used to be a regular routine from 6 in the evening until 6:20. I would make my offering there, and without fail, a person would always pass by just to watch what I was doing, you know? It happened every single time, okay? Well, with that background established, well, nothing. Victor was talking about Stella Maris, the star, the sea. It came to my mind. Or the Holy Spirit told me. Or, okay. And I started searching there with my mobile phone. You can search for Stella Maris Yemanja on Google and it'll take you there on its own. Okay? So you will see the story of... The story I'm about to tell you, well, you can see it for yourselves. Mid-16th century, okay? Mr. Tomé de Souza, who was a great Brazilian conqueror, Portuguese Brazilian, well, he went to the Americas, they conquered their territory, just like the Spanish colonists did, and they took, well, obviously, their black people, their slaves, to work to build the cities. And, well, I've also read that Tomé de Souza always traveled with 6 Jesuits to conquer lands. Okay, I did all of this in 10 minutes, okay? Surely a lot more information will come out. And, well, obviously, like every colonial culture, Tomé de Souza imposed Catholicism on his slaves and inhabitants, okay? Indigenous people. The thing is that both... Well, these diabolical issues work with syncretisms, okay? There are 1,000 ways to fall into sin, 1,000 ways to do things wrong, and 1 to do it right. And Satan is going to disguise himself however he wants, okay? So what happened is that the slaves, okay, they came from Africa and had their deities. What they did was syncretize the Virgin Mary, whom Tomé de Souza and his Jesuits forced them to worship, okay? And when these Catholics thought that the slaves were worshiping the Virgin Mary, in reality, the slaves were worshiping Yemanja. Okay? So it's simply a way of seeing how it's what I going, studying, and learning have seen. I have spoken with dozens of demons, okay? And I have seen that they are always the same few people who change their names, but their attributes are always the same. In the case of Yemanja, Stella Maris, okay? We are talking about fertility, the family. But not only that, but if you go look in the book of Genesis, chapter 4, verse 22, okay? You will find in the lineage of Cain, Mr. Tubal-Cain, okay? It says here, I'm going to read it to you. Look. Mr. Tubal-Cain, who I am looking for...
Who was a craftsman.
Yes. Mr. Tubal-Cain. Let me read you the verse, 1 second. And Zillah also gave birth to Tubal-Cain, a craftsman of every work of bronze and iron. Okay? The verse continues, but we will stick with the bronze and the iron. I encourage you to go right now with your mobile phone, your cell phone, or your computer to search the internet for the word Ogum, O-G-U-M, and you will see that in the Candomblé religion, which is what I was raised in precisely, the god Ogum, who is my father's spiritual father and my father by inheritance, and whom I was destined to serve, is also a craftsman of metals. And this was told to me when I was 8 years old, and it just came to my mind right now. So you can see how the Holy Spirit works and how everything fits together with the smallest trifles. And simply that. Obviously, many more things keep coming to my mind, and what I will do when I get home is look for it, write it down, and on another occasion, give a fuller testimony of what my life has been. But just so you can see the coincidences, coincidences? No, the providences, right? The providences that the Lord has? Nothing, just this. As much as we talk about satanic plagiarisms and lies, we see that Satan just disguises himself again and again and again.
Well then, this experience that our colleague Wallace has told us, the truth is that it shows us once again that Satan really isn't sitting still. Satan also maps out his agenda from ancient times, and demons are still alive. They haven't died since then, and they continue to make their manifestations. When he was telling us that Catholicism went precisely to Brazilian lands and imposed devotion with the image of the Virgin, while the others already had a certain totally pagan cult that was also very similar, what Catholicism did was absorb those beliefs and centralize them in the image of the Virgin, as if it were the famous Stella Maris, right?
Yes.
But the thing is, Catholicism has done the same thing with pagan cultures or pagan religions. It adopted everything from before and disguised it as Christianity. And Satan always plays the game of, I take it, I transform it, but I remain the same. Under different cloaks, different appearances, different forms. But Satan is always assimilating things, mixing them, confusing, creating the worst thing he can do, confusion in beliefs. And he knows how to distort things to such a point that we lose all reference.
Yes, and brothers and sisters, we don't stop talking about the false Messiah who is going to come performing miracles. Brothers, I have seen a demon that called itself an angel of light, okay? You can look him up on the internet. Mr. Trankarua of the Seven Crossroads, healing a deaf man just by laying his hand in front of my eyes. And today, that man wears a hearing aid, the device, but that man can hear. Just by laying his hand on him, if this entity is a fallen angel who is below Satan, what won't Satan do, brothers? So if we have even a little bit of disorientation, he's going to grab us and we're going to fall. So the preparation has to be exhaustive, and as our Lord says, give no opportunity to the enemy, because the enemy has a 6,000-year head start on us and is the most intelligent being in God's creation. So, I don't know, think about it. Because I say, if there are hierarchies in the demonic realm too, this entity was quite far below Lucifer, and he healed a deaf man. So imagine what Satan will do.
When you simulate Jesus.
When you simulate Christ, obviously. That's why I say, prepare yourselves, open your eyes. I won't say to drop everything you're doing, but prioritize what you need to prioritize, because the day of the Lord can be a day of joy or a day of enormous sadness, brothers.
Well then, I think this testimony was worth you knowing about. I want to thank Wallace here. And for our part, that's all for today. We are going to continue this topic next Saturday morning, God willing, where we will continue to look at other deceptions of Satan related precisely to Mount Carmel. And once we finish with that, we will continue with the theme. We will try to move on to chapter 19, if there isn't anything else in between, to try and finish this matter of Elijah in that place, giving us such wonderful signs of how what happened has total significance for what is to come, and in which we are going to fully participate. You know, I'm keeping an Ellen White quote up my sleeve that is going to leave us perplexed regarding the topic of the third Elijah. And I'm going to save that precisely for the end because I think it's going to make an impact on many people who perhaps have read it and haven't even realized what it says there. For my part, that's all. I want to thank you for having followed this topic this Saturday morning and now in the afternoon. And above all, keep in mind that Satan will always do everything to confuse us, to lead us away from the truth with very subtle tricks. Let us remain ever vigilant and always diligently seek the Word of God, for it is truly the only thing that will sustain us, giving us the wisdom to know how to discern one thing from another with His divine help. It is our guiding light in every moment. May God bless you.
This is the image of our page on the YouTube channel. There, you'll find all our material. We will be uploading absolutely everything. And this is the page for everyone who wants to contribute so that we can continue doing this important work to deliver the final message to the world so we can keep going. May God bless you. Maranatha 2031.